I've spent months breaking down minimalist money rules, frugal wealth building habits, and financial wisdom from cultures most Americans have never studied. Today, I'm bringing it all together in one place. I'm starting with the 10 minimalist rules I personally follow right now in 2026. Then I'll walk you through every proven principle, every tested habit, and every cultural money secret that actually builds wealth. Consider this the only minimalist finance guide you'll ever need. Let's get into it. You're sitting on the closet floor at 9 on a Sunday evening. Three garbage bags around you, stuffed with clothes you forgot you owned. You started this purge feeling motivated. Now you feel slightly sick because some of these items still have tags. One is a jacket you bought during a flash sale 6 months ago. You've never worn it once. You paid $140 for it. Your phone buzzes. Bank notification. $12.43 at the coffee shop next to your office. You don't remember stopping there this morning. You always do. You look around your apartment through different eyes now. The exercise bike from the pandemic, still set up with a sweater hanging off the handlebars. The expensive blender that takes up half a kitchen cabinet, used twice. The standing desk converter that's been sitting in its original box for 14 months. Each item represents money that should be working for you, just sitting there as physical evidence of decisions you made without really thinking. The reason most minimalist advice fails has nothing to do with discipline or willpower. It's that the rules were designed for people whose lives look nothing like yours. They were created by single content creators in temperate climates with no children and flexible schedules. Apply those same rules to a family of four in Minnesota or a couple raising kids in Phoenix, and they collapse immediately. Real minimalism in 2026 looks different. The point isn't owning as little as possible. The point isn't hitting some arbitrary item count or photographing well on social media. The point is a small set of decision rules that make wealth building automatic and lifestyle creep impossible. These are the 10 rules I personally live by right now. Every single one has been tested against current American economic reality. Every single one accounts for inflation that's outpaced wage growth, subscription services that have multiplied beyond control, and a consumer economy specifically engineered to separate you from every dollar you earn. None of this is financial advice for your specific situation. These are the principles that work in mine. The first rule is the 30-day pause. Any non-essential purchase over $100 goes on a list before I'm allowed to buy it. The list sits there untouched for 30 days. After 30 days, if I still want the item with the same intensity I felt when I added it, I'm allowed to make the purchase. Most of the time, that moment never comes. Let me introduce you to Tamara. She's a 37-year-old marketing director in Denver earning $110,000 annually. She started using this rule about 2 years ago after realizing she was spending somewhere around $400 a month on what she calls phantom purchases, things she bought, used briefly, and then completely forgot about within a few weeks. Tamara kept a running list in the Notes app on her phone. Over the first 90 days of using this rule, she added 43 items to the list. The cumulative value of those items came to about $3,200. After the 30-day waiting period elapsed for each one, she actually purchased only 7 items, totaling around $640. The math here is staggering. She prevented herself from spending roughly $2,560 on things she thought she desperately needed in the moment, but couldn't even remember 30 days later. Annualized, that's over $10,000 in avoided spending. Invested at 8% over 20 years, that single rule alone could grow to nearly $500,000. The psychology behind this rule is what makes it work. The retail industry has perfected the science of manufactured urgency. Limited time offers, flash sales, countdown timers, only 3 left in stock notifications. Every single one of those mechanisms exists for one reason: to prevent you from doing exactly what the 30-day pause forces you to do. Wait. When you wait, your brain processes the purchase rationally instead of emotionally. The dopamine hit of acquisition fades. The novelty wears off. You start asking questions like, where will this actually live in my home? And do I already own something that does this same thing? These questions are toxic to impulse spending, which is exactly why the marketing systems work so hard to prevent you from asking them in the first place. The rule also creates a psychological speed bump that captures behavioral data about yourself. You start noticing patterns. Maybe you add things to the list every Sunday evening after scrolling through social media. Maybe certain influencers consistently trigger your impulse purchases. Maybe stress at work correlates with retail therapy. Once you can see these patterns clearly, you can address them directly, rather than fighting individual battles against each purchase. For genuinely useful purchases, 30 days is no obstacle. The new winter coat you need before the cold sets in will still be needed in a month. The replacement laptop for one that's actually failing will still be necessary in 30 days. The rule doesn't prevent you from buying what you genuinely need. It eliminates the things you only thought you needed in a moment of weakness. The second rule involves a simple piece of math that I run before any significant purchase. Cost per use must come in under $1 within the first year, or the purchase doesn't happen. The calculation is straightforward. Total purchase price divided by realistic number of uses over 12 months. Derek is a 41-year-old high school teacher in Cleveland, earning $68,000 annually. He uses this rule religiously after years of accumulating expensive equipment for hobbies he abandoned within months. The home espresso machine he bought for $1,400. The mountain bike he paid $2,200 for. The professional camera kit that set him back nearly $3,000. Each of those items got used a handful of times before joining what Derek calls his closet graveyard. When he started running the cost per use math, the picture became clear immediately. The espresso machine, used twice a week for 6 months before being abandoned, cost roughly $26 per cup of coffee. The bike, ridden 8 times total before being shoved into the garage, cost $275 per ride. The camera kit, used for 1 weekend trip and then forgotten, came out to about $1,500 per use. Compare that to purchases that actually passed the test. Derek bought a high-quality kitchen knife for $180. He uses it nearly every day, which puts the cost per use at about 50 cents in the first year and pennies per use over the lifetime of the knife. He bought a quality pair of running shoes for $160. Used 3 times a week, that's about $1 per use in year 1 and far less in subsequent years. The rule cuts through marketing in a way nothing else does. Marketing focuses on the emotional appeal of ownership. Cost per use focuses on the actual functional value the item will deliver. A $2,000 Peloton bike used every day for 2 years comes out to less than $3 per workout, which is a remarkable bargain. The same bike used twice and then abandoned comes out to $1,000 per workout, which is financial insanity. Be brutally honest when running this calculation. The version of you that exists right now is the one who will be using this item, not the aspirational version you imagine becoming after the purchase. If you've never reliably cooked complex meals, the elaborate cookware probably won't get used, regardless of how much you spend on it. If you've never maintained an exercise routine, the home gym equipment will not magically change that pattern. The other dimension of this rule involves understanding that some purchases get cheaper per use over time, while others get more expensive. A high-quality mattress used every night for a decade might come out to less than 15 cents per use over its lifetime. A formal dress worn once a year for special occasions might come out to $40 or $50 per use, which is fine if you actually wear it that often, but devastating if you only wear it twice in its lifetime. Run the math before you buy. Project realistic usage rather than aspirational usage. The number that comes out the other end will tell you whether the purchase makes sense or whether you're about to add another item to your own personal closet graveyard. Let me pause here for a moment because these first 2 rules might seem mechanical, almost clinical in the way they treat purchasing decisions. That's intentional. The entire consumer economy has been engineered to make spending decisions emotional rather than rational. The rules that work in your favor are the ones that reintroduce rationality at the exact moment when emotion would otherwise win. The third rule applies to anything that loses value the moment you take ownership. Cars, electronics, furniture, exercise equipment, tools, kitchen appliances. If it depreciates, I buy it used. New only happens for items that genuinely last longer when purchased new, or where safety implications make used purchases problematic. Look at the numbers on a new vehicle in 2026. The average new car payment hit $772 monthly, according to recent data from Edmunds. Over 20% of new car buyers now commit to monthly payments exceeding $1,000. Total U.S. auto loan debt has climbed past $1.5 trillion, with the average new vehicle losing roughly 20% of its value the moment it leaves the dealership lot. Janelle made the switch about 3 years ago. She's a 39-year-old nurse in Phoenix who'd been leasing luxury sedans for nearly a decade. Her monthly payments averaged around $650, with insurance running another $250 because of the vehicle category. After each lease ended, she'd return the car with nothing to show for years of payments and start the cycle over again. She switched to buying a 5-year-old Honda Accord with about 60,000 miles for $14,000 cash. The car was reliable, fully featured, and had already absorbed the steepest depreciation. She drove it for 4 years before selling it for $9,000, which means her actual transportation cost over those 4 years came to about $5,000 in depreciation plus maintenance. Compare that to her previous pattern. The luxury lease cost her about $10,800 annually in payments and insurance alone. Over 4 years, that's $43,200 with absolutely nothing to show at the end. Her new approach saved her roughly $38,000 over the same period. Invested at 7% over 20 years, that single change in transportation strategy could grow to nearly $150,000. The same logic applies across categories. Electronics depreciate rapidly. A 2-year-old MacBook costs about half what a new one costs and performs nearly identically for most users. Furniture from estate sales, marketplace listings, and consignment shops costs a fraction of new prices and often comes from higher quality construction than current retail offerings. Used exercise equipment from people who abandon their fitness goals can be acquired for 10 to 20 cents on the dollar. Research on actual millionaire spending patterns confirms this approach. According to Thomas Stanley's foundational research, the median price millionaires pay for a vehicle is around $31,000. The top brands among millionaires aren't European luxury makes. They're Toyota, Honda, and Ford. Experian Automotive found that 61% of people earning over $250,000 annually drive Japanese or American mainstream vehicles. The people who can afford luxury new often choose not to buy it because they understand what it actually costs. The pushback I hear most often is about reliability. The assumption that used vehicles bring constant repair problems. Modern vehicles from reputable manufacturers routinely run 200,000 miles or more with basic maintenance. A 5-year-old Toyota Camry with 70,000 miles is statistically more reliable than a brand new vehicle from a less established brand. Reliability comes from manufacturer quality and basic maintenance, not from purchase date. The fourth rule addresses what might be the most insidious wealth drain of the modern economy: subscriptions. Every 3 months, I conduct what I call a subscription autopsy. Every recurring charge gets identified. Every service gets evaluated. Anything that hasn't been actively used in the past 60 days gets canceled immediately. The scale of this problem is enormous and getting worse. Recent research from C+R Research found that Americans now spend an average of $219 monthly on subscriptions, while estimating their own spending at only $86. That's a gap of more than $130 monthly between what people think they spend and what they actually spend. Annualized, that's around $1,560 of unconscious spending per person. Patricia is a 45-year-old accountant in Charlotte, earning $85,000. When she did her first subscription autopsy 2 years ago, she identified 23 active recurring charges totaling $342 per month. Streaming services she'd forgotten she had, a gym membership from when she briefly tried CrossFit, 3 different meditation apps, a premium dating app she'd stopped using after meeting her partner, 2 language learning subscriptions she'd abandoned after a week each. She canceled 14 of those services immediately. The remaining 9 she kept were ones she actively used and genuinely valued. Her monthly subscription spending dropped to $118, freeing up $224 monthly. That's $2,688 annually that had been disappearing into services providing zero value. The mechanics of how this happens are designed by software. Free trials that automatically convert to paid subscriptions. Cancellation processes that require phone calls when sign-up required only a single click. Price increases announced in emails that nobody reads. Annual renewals that happen before you've thought about whether you still want the service. Every step has been optimized to maximize the chance that you keep paying for things you've forgotten you have. The autopsy works because it's systematic. Every quarter, I open my credit card statement and bank account and look at every recurring charge. Anything I can't immediately justify gets evaluated. The test is simple. Have I used this service meaningfully in the past 60 days? If yes, it stays. If no, it gets canceled today. Not later, not next week, today. The savings compound in ways most people don't appreciate. $200 monthly redirected to investments at 8% over 25 years grows to approximately $190,000. The streaming services and apps you forgot you had cost more than you realize because every dollar spent on them is a dollar that can't compound into your future. The opportunity cost dwarfs the actual subscription fees. Set a recurring calendar reminder for the first weekend of January, April, July, and October. Block out an hour. Open your statements. Hunt down every recurring charge. Cancel without mercy anything you don't actively use. This rule alone, executed faithfully for a decade, can mean the difference between retiring comfortably and retiring stressed. The 5th rule addresses something that hides in plain sight in nearly every American home: function duplicates. Items that perform the same job as something you already own. The rule is straightforward. One primary item per function in your life. If I'm acquiring something new that performs a function I already cover with an existing item, the existing item leaves before the new one enters. This is different from rigid one-in, one-out rules that force removals just to satisfy a formula. The point here is preventing accumulation of items that overlap in purpose. If your household genuinely needs 4 bath towels because 4 people live there, 4 towels is correct. But 4 blenders for one person who blends smoothies twice a week is duplicate accumulation. Andre is a 43-year-old engineer in Seattle. When he applied this rule to his kitchen about 18 months ago, he counted 17 appliances that essentially overlapped in function. He had a stand mixer, a hand mixer, a food processor with a mixing attachment, a high-powered blender with a mixing function, and an immersion blender, all of which could mix things. He'd accumulated them over a decade of cooking enthusiasm, without ever consolidating. When he applied the one-function rule, he kept the stand mixer and the immersion blender, which together covered everything he actually did. The other 3 appliances got sold at a yard sale for about $340. Beyond the money recovered, he freed up significant kitchen counter and cabinet space. The cognitive load of managing all those appliances disappeared. The financial impact of this rule operates on multiple levels. First, you stop buying duplicates. Second, you sell or donate existing duplicates and recover some of their value. Third, and most importantly, you stop the psychological pattern that creates duplicate accumulation in the first place. That pattern is novelty seeking. The dopamine hit of acquisition feels good regardless of whether the acquisition serves a genuine need. Apply this to clothing and the impact becomes obvious. The average American spends approximately $1,800 annually on apparel, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics data. Much of that spending goes to items that duplicate things already in the closet. A new black sweater when you have 4 already. Another pair of running shoes nearly identical to last year's pair. The 5th white button-down that looks almost exactly like the other 4. When you commit to the one-function rule, the next sweater purchase requires the old one to leave first. This creates friction at exactly the right moment. You have to confront the reality that you already own something fulfilling this exact function. The question becomes whether the new item is actually better or just newer. Most of the time, just newer wins out, which means you keep the existing item and skip the purchase entirely. The rule extends to digital duplicates as well. Multiple email accounts you check inconsistently. Several note-taking apps with overlapping notes. Streaming services that all show similar content. Productivity tools that mostly do the same thing. Each duplicate creates cognitive load and often direct cost. Consolidation simplifies your life and frees up resources. Pause for a second, because something needs to be said about how all of this fits together. These rules aren't about deprivation. They aren't about owning as little as possible or competing with anyone to be the most minimalist person on social media. They're about understanding that every purchase, every duplicate, every forgotten subscription is borrowing from your future self. The goal isn't a smaller life. The goal is a life with more options, because more of your money is working for you instead of disappearing into things that don't matter. The 6th rule is one most people resist initially, but that produces remarkable financial results once adopted. Never pay to store something you don't actively use. If an item is worth keeping, it earns its place by being used. If it's not being used, it gets sold rather than stored. The storage industry exists because Americans have a fundamental problem with letting go of possessions. The self-storage market in the United States has grown to approximately $40 billion annually. Over 10% of American households now pay for off-site storage. The average monthly storage unit cost runs between $150 and $300, depending on size and location. Think about what those numbers actually mean. Someone paying $200 monthly for a storage unit spends $2,400 annually to store items that aren't being used. Over a decade, that's $24,000 to keep furniture, boxes, and forgotten possessions accessible. Invested at 8% over the same decade, the avoided storage costs alone could grow to approximately $36,000. Marcus is a 35-year-old contractor in Houston who realized this dynamic when his storage unit rent increased to $280 monthly. He opened the unit for the first time in over 2 years and discovered roughly $4,000 worth of items he'd completely forgotten owning. Furniture from a previous apartment, camping equipment from a phase he'd moved past, boxes of college memorabilia he'd intended to organize someday. He spent one weekend systematically going through every item. He sold things online and through local marketplace listings, recovering about $2,800 from items he didn't even remember owning. He donated another category of items that weren't worth selling. By the end of the weekend, the storage unit was empty and he'd canceled the rental. The annual savings of $3,360, redirected to retirement accounts, will grow to over $25,000 over the next 2 decades. That's wealth created by stopping the slow bleeding of storage costs, combined with one-time recovery of value from items that had been functionally invisible. The same principle applies to storage within your home that you're already paying for. Every square foot of your living space costs money, whether through rent or mortgage. Filling that space with items you don't use means paying ongoing rent or interest to store those items. A guest room used twice a year, occupied otherwise by accumulated possessions, represents thousands of dollars annually in space costs for items you aren't actively using. The sell before you store rule extends to seasonal items as well. Holiday decorations that fill entire closets. Sports equipment for activities you've abandoned. Hobby supplies for crafts you tried once. Each category gets evaluated against the simple test: Do I use this enough to justify the space and storage cost? If not, sell or donate it and free up resources for things that matter. The seventh rule applies to a specific category of purchases, items I use frequently and that wear out with regular use. For these items, I buy the highest quality version I can reasonably afford, and then I don't replace it for years. The math behind this rule contradicts the instinct that cheap is always cheaper. Carla is a 38-year-old physician assistant in Boston who switched to this approach about 5 years ago. She used to buy budget shoes that cost around $40 and lasted about 6 months of daily wear before being uncomfortable enough to replace. Over a decade, she was spending roughly $800 on shoes, and her feet were chronically uncomfortable because the shoes never had time to break in properly before being replaced. She switched to a single pair of high-quality leather shoes that cost $290. She's worn them daily for almost 4 years. They've been resold twice for about $60 each time. Her total shoe spending over the past 4 years comes to about $410, compared to the roughly $320 she would have spent on budget replacements during the same period. The total spending is similar, but the experience is dramatically different. The quality shoes fit better, lasted longer, looked better, and ultimately created less waste. The hidden costs of cheap repeatedly are real. The discomfort of breaking in new shoes every 6 months. The cognitive load of constantly evaluating replacements. The environmental cost of constant disposal. The aesthetic cost of looking constantly slightly worn out because everything you own is on its way to being replaced. This rule applies most powerfully to items used daily or near daily. A high-quality mattress used every night for 15 years costs less per use than a budget mattress replaced every 5 years. A well-made winter coat worn through 10 winters costs less than 3 cheap coats replaced over the same period. Quality kitchen knives used daily for 2 decades cost a fraction per use of the cheap knives that need to be replaced or sharpened constantly. The principle has limits. For items used infrequently or for purposes where quality differences don't significantly affect performance, cheap is appropriate. A formal dress worn twice a year doesn't need to be expensive. A tool used once a year doesn't justify professional-grade pricing. The rule applies to high-use items where the durability and performance differences justify the price premium. Apply this rule to the items you actually use every single day. Footwear, bedding, basic clothing categories you wear weekly, kitchen tools you use daily, your work bag if you commute. The categories where quality matters are the ones where you'll interact with the item thousands of times over its lifetime. Spreading higher initial cost across many uses produces lower cost per use than repeatedly buying cheap alternatives that fail quickly. The trap to avoid is buying expensive items for categories you don't use heavily. The expensive watch that sits in a drawer most of the time. The luxury luggage used twice a year. The premium kitchen appliance for a cooking method you rarely employ. For these categories, the cheap option produces lower cost per use because you're not interacting with the item frequently enough to benefit from quality differences. The eighth rule addresses the single most important moment in your financial life, the moment your income increases. Every raise, every bonus, every additional income stream gets split automatically before it hits my checking account. 50% goes to investments, 25% goes to savings, 25% is available for lifestyle. The reason this rule matters so much is that lifestyle inflation is the primary reason high earners don't build wealth. Recent research from Goldman Sachs found that roughly 41% of Americans earning between $300,000 and $500,000 annually report living paycheck to paycheck. 40% of those earning over $500,000 say the same. Lifestyle expansion happens automatically alongside income growth, leaving the same percentage of nothing at the end of every month. Priya is a 42-year-old software engineering manager in San Francisco. She started her career making $72,000. Over 15 years, her income climbed to $285,000. For the first 8 years, every raise just disappeared into expanded lifestyle. Nicer apartments, better restaurants, more travel, premium subscriptions. By year 8, despite quadrupling her income, her savings rate was still around 5%. She implemented the splitting rule starting at year 9. Her income at that point was about $180,000. Over the next 6 years, her income grew by another $105,000. Under the 50-25-25 split, $52,500 of that income increase flowed automatically to investments. $26,250 went to savings. The remaining $26,250 was available for lifestyle improvements. Her investment account grew by hundreds of thousands of dollars during those 6 years, partly from market returns, but largely because she actually had money flowing in. Her lifestyle still improved. Better apartment, more travel, premium things she valued. The lifestyle expansion just happened at half the rate of her income growth, leaving margin for wealth building. The automation is critical. The split can't depend on willpower at the end of the month. The investment transfers and savings transfers happen automatically on the same day the larger paycheck arrives. By the time the money is visible in checking, the wealth-building portion is already gone. The lifestyle that adjusts is the lifestyle that lives on the remaining amount. This rule prevents the trap that catches almost every high earner. The trap is that bigger income enables bigger spending, which creates the appearance of wealth without actual wealth accumulation. The leased BMW, the bigger house, the elaborate vacations, all of these signal success while preventing the actual building of wealth. Splitting every raise before it hits checking eliminates this trap automatically. For someone earning a typical American income, the implementation looks slightly different, but the principle is identical. Even on a moderate income, every raise should be split before being absorbed into spending. A $5,000 annual raise split 50-25-25 means $2,500 goes to investments, $1,250 to savings, and $1,250 becomes available for lifestyle. Over a 30-year career with multiple raises handled this way, the difference compounds into hundreds of thousands of dollars. Notice something happening across these rules. None of them require unusual income. None of them require special knowledge or financial sophistication. They require only that you reintroduce conscious decision-making at moments when the consumer economy has been engineered to make you spend automatically. The economy doesn't lose money when you make conscious choices. It loses access to you, which is exactly why it works so hard to keep your decisions unconscious. The 9th rule operates once a year and has the power to transform your relationship with everything you own. The annual replacement test. Walk through your home category by category and ask one question about every meaningful item. If this disappeared tomorrow, would I spend money to replace it? This question is structurally different from time-based rules like, haven't used in 6 months, get rid of it. The replacement test handles seasonal items correctly because you'd absolutely replace your winter coat if it disappeared, even in July. It handles occasional items correctly because you'd replace the formal suit you wear twice a year. It catches items that exist in your life purely through accumulated familiarity rather than genuine value. Gina is a 44-year-old project manager in Atlanta who applied this test for the first time last year. She went through her home over the course of 2 weeks, examining every category systematically: clothing, kitchen items, decorative objects, electronics, books, exercise equipment, hobby supplies. For each significant item, she asked the replacement question honestly. The answers shocked her. Roughly 60% of what she owned failed the test. She wouldn't spend money to replace these items if they disappeared. They existed in her life through accumulated inertia rather than conscious value. The fondue set she'd never used. The decorative pieces she'd bought during impulsive moments. The clothes from previous phases of her life. The exercise equipment from goals she'd abandoned. She systematically removed items that failed the test, either through sales, donations, or disposal. The financial impact alone was substantial. She recovered about $3,400 from sales of higher value items. Equally important was what happened to her relationship with her remaining possessions. Everything that remained had passed an active test of value. She wanted these things in her life consciously rather than by default. The test also changes future purchases. Once you've experienced the discomfort of eliminating items that failed the replacement test, you become more careful about acquiring items that might fail it later. The friction at the front end prevents accumulation at the back end. You start asking the replacement question before purchasing rather than only when auditing what you already own. The annual timing prevents this from becoming a constant background activity. Once a year is frequent enough to catch accumulation before it becomes overwhelming, and rare enough that it doesn't dominate your mental life. Set a specific weekend each year. Block the time. Walk through your home with intention. Ask the question. Act on the answers. The cumulative effect over a decade is remarkable. Each annual audit removes the items that have stopped serving you and reinforces the habit of conscious acquisition. The accumulated wealth from items recovered through sales adds up. The avoided purchases from improved discipline compound even more significantly. The space and mental clarity from a home full of items you've actively chosen creates daily quality of life improvements that money alone can't buy. Don't expect to feel comfortable during this process. It feels strange to acknowledge that significant portions of your possessions don't actually matter to you. That discomfort is the point. The system has trained you to feel guilty about removing things, to assume you might need them someday, to convince yourself that the money spent on them is somehow recovered by continued ownership. None of those assumptions survive honest examination. The 10th rule is the most philosophical and ultimately the most important. Define what enough looks like in writing before your income reaches the level where excess becomes possible. Specific numbers, specific lifestyle parameters, specific limits across categories. This rule exists because the human tendency toward expanding desire is essentially infinite. Whatever you have, you can imagine having more. Whatever you earn, you can imagine spending. The Charles Schwab Modern Wealth Survey found that Americans believe they need approximately $2,300,000 to be considered wealthy. They believe they need $839,000 to feel financially comfortable. The numbers keep climbing every year, regardless of actual financial circumstances. Someone who never defines enough in advance will keep moving the goalpost forever. They'll reach an income level they would have considered wealthy a decade earlier and find it inadequate. They'll achieve a net worth that would have astonished their younger self and feel behind. The expansion of desire outpaces any conceivable income growth. The defense is to define enough specifically and in writing before excess becomes available. What kind of home would actually serve your life? Not the biggest home you could afford. The right home for your actual needs. What kind of vehicle meets your transportation needs? Not the most prestigious vehicle in your price range. The right vehicle for what you actually do. What does enough look like in clothing, dining, travel, entertainment, and every other lifestyle category? Write these definitions down when your income is still building toward them. Refer to them when you eventually have the resources to exceed them. The written definition serves as a counterweight to the constant social and marketing pressure to expand consumption. Tamara, the marketing director from Denver, mentioned at the start of this video, wrote her enough definitions about 7 years ago when she was earning $70,000 annually. Her definitions included a specific home size and location, a vehicle category, an annual travel budget, a clothing budget, and dining limits. Her income has since grown to $110,000. Most of the income growth has flowed to investments and savings because her lifestyle remained anchored to her written definitions. If she hadn't written those definitions in advance, the income growth would have been absorbed automatically into expanded consumption. The bigger house she could now afford, the newer vehicle, the more elaborate travel. Each individual upgrade would have felt reasonable. Cumulatively, they would have consumed the entire income increase. The rule isn't about deprivation or denial of pleasure. It's about consciously choosing what actually improves your life versus what just inflates your lifestyle. Some things genuinely make life better. Other things just signal status or fill emotional voids. The written definitions force you to identify which is which before the resources to pursue everything become available. Defining enough also creates the psychological condition that almost nobody achieves: sufficiency. The feeling that what you have meets your needs and serves your life. Without this definition, sufficiency is impossible because the goal keeps moving. With this definition, sufficiency becomes available regardless of income level. These 10 rules have specific applications depending on where you currently stand financially. If you're in your 20s or early 30s, implement the 30-day pause and the cost per use threshold first. These 2 rules alone, applied consistently from early adulthood, will prevent the accumulation that traps so many people by their 40s. Build the habits before lifestyle inflation has a chance to take hold. If you're in your 30s or 40s with significant accumulation already in place, start with the quarterly subscription autopsy and the annual replacement test. These rules address what's already accumulated and free up resources that are currently being consumed by things you don't actively value. The immediate financial impact will be visible within a single quarter. If you're approaching retirement and trying to optimize the final stretch of working years, the splitting rule on every raise becomes critical. So does the discipline around quality purchases over cheap, repeated purchases. The years right before retirement are when wealth building happens fastest if income is preserved rather than absorbed by expanded lifestyle. Across all life stages, defining enough in writing is the rule that protects all the others. Without that anchor, every other rule eventually erodes because the goalpost keeps moving. With it, the other rules have something specific to protect. Real minimalism doesn't look like the white-walled apartments on social media. It doesn't require capsule wardrobes or extreme decluttering rituals. It doesn't make for impressive before and after photos. It makes for a life where your money works for you instead of disappearing into things that don't matter. The person who follows these rules consistently for a decade ends up with options that the person who didn't will never have. These options matter beyond retirement, though those matter too. Options now. The ability to take a career risk. The ability to walk away from a job that's destroying their health. The ability to handle an emergency without crisis. The ability to choose how they spend their time because their money has stopped requiring constant labor to maintain. Everything in this video connects back to financial literacy. The reason most people don't follow rules like these isn't lack of discipline. It's that nobody ever showed them how money actually works at the level required to make these rules feel obvious. The system benefits enormously from financial illiteracy. Every dollar you spend unconsciously is a dollar transferred from your future to someone else's profit margin. I put together something called the financial reset system for the people who watch this content and recognize themselves in the patterns I describe. It walks through the foundations of how money actually moves through your life, how to identify the unconscious spending that's quietly draining your future, and how to build the systems that make wealth building automatic instead of dependent on willpower. The link is in the description and in my profile if you want to take a look. None of this is financial advice for your specific situation. The financial reset system is the foundational framework that makes specific decisions possible. None of these rules require unusual income. None of them require sophisticated knowledge. They require only the willingness to reintroduce conscious decision-making at moments when the consumer economy has been engineered to make you decide automatically. Every conscious decision is a small refusal of that engineering. Every small refusal compounds into something larger over time. The 10 rules I just walked through are the ones I personally live by. They've shaped every significant financial decision I've made for years. They've allowed me to build wealth on income that wouldn't otherwise have produced it. They've kept lifestyle inflation from absorbing every raise and bonus. They've created the margin that makes everything else possible. Those are the rules I build my financial life around. Every single one of them came from years of studying what actually works versus what just sounds good on paper. Because here's the thing most people don't realize. Some of the most popular minimalist money advice floating around the internet is flat out wrong. Following it doesn't just waste your time, it actively costs you money. Let me show you the 10 minimalist rules that seem smart but are quietly working against you, and what to do instead. You decluttered your entire closet last spring. Bags of clothes went to donation. You felt lighter, clearer, more intentional about what remained. For about 3 weeks, opening your closet brought genuine satisfaction. Finally, you were living with less. Finally, you had it figured out. Then summer arrived, and you realized you donated your only pair of shorts that actually fit. Fall came, and you couldn't find the jacket you'd worn every October for 5 years. Gone. Sacrificed to the minimalism gods during your decluttering frenzy. Winter hit, and you found yourself rebuying items nearly identical to things you'd given away months earlier. You followed the rules. You did everything the minimalism content told you to do. Somehow, you ended up with less money, more frustration, and a creeping suspicion that this whole minimalism thing might be designed for people whose lives look nothing like yours. Here's what nobody tells you about minimalist advice. Much of it was created by single people in temperate climates with flexible jobs and no children. The rules that work for a 28-year-old content creator in Los Angeles don't necessarily work for a family of 4 in Minnesota. The systems designed for someone who works from home don't translate to someone with a commute, a dress code, and hobbies that require equipment. The problem isn't minimalism itself. The core idea of being intentional about possessions genuinely improves life. The problem is that popular minimalist rules have become rigid dogma, applied universally to situations they were never designed for. This video breaks down 10 minimalist rules that consistently backfire, along with what actually works instead. If you've tried minimalism and felt like you were failing at it, you weren't failing. You were following advice that doesn't account for how real people actually live. The first rule that doesn't work: if you haven't used it in 6 months, get rid of it. This is probably the most repeated minimalism advice in existence, and it causes more regret and rebuying than any other rule. The logic seems sound. If something hasn't been touched in 6 months, you clearly don't need it. But this time frame ignores entire categories of legitimately useful possessions. Seasonal items. You don't use your winter coat in July or your swimsuit in January. 6 months of non-use means nothing for items tied to seasons. Occasion-specific items. The suit you wear to weddings and funerals. The formal dress for annual events. The camping gear for your yearly trip. These might sit unused for 8 or 10 months and still be essential when their occasion arrives. Emergency supplies. First aid kits, backup batteries, jumper cables, tools for home repairs. You might not touch these for years, and then suddenly they're the most important things you own. Life stage items. Maternity clothes. Baby equipment waiting for a second child. Professional attire from a career you might return to. 6 months of unemployment doesn't mean you'll never work in that field again. The rebuying problem is real. I've watched people donate winter boots in August only to buy new winter boots in November. The original boots were fine, perfectly broken in, comfortable, years of life left. The new boots cost money, required breaking in, and weren't as good as what was discarded. What works instead? Evaluate items based on their purpose and realistic future use rather than arbitrary timeframes. Ask yourself, when would I realistically need this? Is that scenario likely? Could I easily replace this if the scenario arose? For genuinely unnecessary items, 6 months might be too long a grace period. For seasonal or occasional items, 6 months is absurdly short. Match your evaluation time frame to the actual nature of the item. The second rule that doesn't work: your wardrobe should contain exactly 33 items. The capsule wardrobe movement popularized specific numbers: 33 items, 25 items, some number that sounds impressively small and fits nicely into a headline. These numbers are completely arbitrary. They weren't derived from research on optimal wardrobe size. They were invented by individuals describing their personal preferences, then repeated until they became rules. A 33-piece wardrobe might work perfectly for someone who lives in San Diego, works remotely, and rarely attends formal events. The same wardrobe would be absurdly inadequate for someone in Chicago who commutes to a corporate office, attends their kids' sporting events, exercises regularly, and experiences 4 distinct seasons. Different lives require different amounts of clothing. A nurse needs different footwear than an accountant. A frequent traveler needs different quantities than someone who rarely leaves their city. Someone rebuilding their wardrobe after weight change needs different considerations than someone whose size has been stable for decades. The number also ignores the distinction between minimizing items and minimizing decisions. A larger wardrobe of versatile, interchangeable pieces might actually produce fewer decisions than a tiny capsule requiring constant outfit engineering. What works instead? Focus on eliminating what you genuinely don't wear rather than hitting an arbitrary number. Keep items that fit well, make you feel good, and serve actual occasions in your actual life. If your functional wardrobe contains 50 items, that's fine. If it contains 80 items because you have hobbies, seasonal needs, and professional requirements that demand variety, that's also fine. The goal is intentionality about what you own, not competitive minimizing. The third rule that doesn't work: buy experiences instead of things. This advice has become almost religious doctrine. Experiences are good, things are bad, and anyone who spends money on physical possessions is missing the point of life. The dichotomy is false. Experiences and things aren't opposing categories. They're deeply intertwined. Things enable experiences. A bicycle enables the experience of riding through your neighborhood. A tent enables the experience of camping with friends. A good kitchen knife enables the experience of cooking meals you're proud of. Musical instruments, art supplies, sports equipment, books, these are things that create experiences. Some experiences require extensive things. Photography, woodworking, gardening, rock climbing, these pursuits demand equipment. Telling someone to stop buying things and start buying experiences ignores that their experiences require things. And some things are experiences. A beautiful piece of art you see every day is an ongoing experience. A comfortable chair you sit in while reading creates thousands of small experiences over its lifetime. Things you interact with regularly aren't opposed to experiences. They're containers for them. The advice also ignores financial reality. A week-long vacation might cost more than a piece of furniture that brings daily satisfaction for a decade. Spending $300 on a dinner creates one evening of experience. The same $300 on a quality item you use daily might create 10 years of experience. What works instead? Evaluate purchases based on the ongoing value they'll add to your life rather than categorizing them as thing versus experience. How often will you engage with this? How much satisfaction will each engagement provide? Does this enable activities that matter to you? A kayak is technically a thing. It's also the vessel for years of experiences on the water. Reject the false dichotomy and think in terms of value created over time. The fourth rule that doesn't work: one in, one out with no exceptions. The one in, one out rule states that for every new item entering your home, one equivalent item must leave. Buy a new shirt, donate an old shirt. Acquire a new kitchen gadget, remove an existing one. This rule makes sense as a general principle for preventing accumulation. As a rigid law applied without exception, it falls apart. Sometimes you genuinely need more of something. If you've been making do with 2 bath towels and buy 2 more, you don't need to throw away your existing towels to make room. You actually need 4 towels. That's why you bought more. Life circumstances change in ways that require additional items. New hobbies, new jobs, new family members, moves to different climates. These situations legitimately require acquiring things without corresponding removal. The rule can prevent upgrading strategically. If you own 1 mediocre pan and buy 1 quality pan, removing the mediocre pan makes sense. But if you own 3 mediocre pans and buy 1 quality pan that could replace 2 of them, the one in, one out math doesn't capture the actual improvement happening. It also creates strange incentives. People following this rule rigidly sometimes throw away perfectly good items just to create permission to acquire something new. The environmental and financial waste of this approach undermines the whole point of mindful consumption. What works instead? Apply the one in, one out principle flexibly as a check against mindless accumulation rather than a rigid law. Before acquiring something new, ask whether you have space for it physically and mentally. Ask whether something existing could leave to make room. But don't force removals that don't make sense just to satisfy a formula. The goal is thoughtful curation of your possessions over time, not strict mathematical compliance with arbitrary rules. The fifth rule that doesn't work: keep only what sparks joy. Marie Kondo's spark joy concept resonated with millions because it introduced emotional consideration into decluttering decisions. The problem comes when spark joy becomes the only criterion. Utility matters too. Your toilet brush doesn't spark joy. Neither does your plunger, your tax documents, your first aid kit, or your snow shovel. These items exist because they serve necessary functions, rather than because handling them produces delight. The spark joy test works beautifully for discretionary items: clothes you wear by choice, decorations, books, personal items. It fails completely for functional necessities. It also fails for things you haven't connected with yet. New items rarely spark the same joy as items you've built history with. A book you haven't read doesn't spark the joy of a book you loved. A tool you haven't mastered doesn't spark the joy of a tool that's become an extension of your hand. Spark joy as a test would eliminate anything new. And joy itself is complicated. Some items don't spark joy in the moment, but enable future joy. Workout equipment might not spark joy at 6 a.m., but it enables the joy of fitness and health. Art supplies might not spark joy while sitting unused, but they spark joy when creative inspiration strikes. What works instead? Evaluate items on multiple dimensions. Does it spark joy? Is it useful? Is it necessary? Does it enable activities I value? Would I miss it if it were gone? An item can stay if it satisfies any of these criteria meaningfully. It should go only if it fails all of them. The spark joy test is one valuable question among several, not the only question that matters. The sixth rule that doesn't work: declutter everything in one massive weekend purge. Minimalism content loves the dramatic transformation, the before and after of a single weekend that converts chaos into calm. The packing party, the complete closet overhaul, the whole house declutter accomplished in 48 hours. These dramatic purges make great content. They make terrible strategy. Rushed decisions produce regret. When you're in declutter mode, riding the dopamine hit of filling donation bags, you make decisions you wouldn't make in a calmer state. Items get removed not because they should go, but because the momentum of purging sweeps them along. The rebuying problem is worst after big purges. Nearly everyone who does a dramatic whole house declutter ends up rebuying things they removed. The money wasted on replacement often exceeds what a more thoughtful approach would have cost. Big purges don't build habits. A weekend transformation is an event, not a practice. When it's over, you haven't learned anything sustainable. New items accumulate, and a year later, you need another dramatic purge because the underlying patterns haven't changed. They're also exhausting in ways that create negative associations. When decluttering feels like a grueling marathon, you avoid doing it. The task becomes something you dread rather than a routine maintenance activity. What works instead? Declutter in small, regular sessions rather than dramatic events. 15 minutes weekly produces better results than 8 hours once a year. Start with easy areas: that junk drawer, the bathroom cabinet, a single shelf. Build the habit of examining possessions thoughtfully. Over months, the small sessions add up to comprehensive decluttering without the mistakes of rushed decisions. This approach also catches accumulation early. Instead of letting things pile up until they require dramatic intervention, you're continuously curating in real time. The seventh rule that doesn't work: minimalists must embrace an all-white aesthetic. Open any minimalism blog or Instagram account, and you'll see the same visual language: white walls, white furniture, natural wood, empty surfaces, plants carefully placed as the only organic element. This aesthetic has become so associated with minimalism that people think adopting the lifestyle requires adopting the look. This confuses aesthetic minimalism with practical minimalism. They're related but separate concepts, and conflating them creates problems. All white spaces require constant maintenance. White shows every mark, stain, and speck of dust. Keeping the minimalist aesthetic pristine is itself a time-consuming, unminimalist task. Many people who adopt this look end up spending more time cleaning than they did before. The aesthetic actively conflicts with some lives. Families with young children cannot maintain white surfaces. People with messy hobbies cannot maintain empty workspaces. Pet owners cannot maintain pristine floors. The lifestyle itself prevents the aesthetic from working. It can also feel cold and unwelcoming. Homes need personality to feel like homes. Removing all color, all texture, all visual interest in pursuit of minimalist aesthetics can create spaces that look beautiful in photos, but feel sterile to inhabit. What works instead? Separate the question of how much you own from the question of how your space looks. You can own relatively few things while still having color, texture, pattern, and personality in your home. You can practice minimalism in a maximalist decorated space. Focus on whether your possessions serve you functionally and emotionally rather than whether your space photographs well. The goal is a life that works for you, not a life that impresses strangers on the internet. The 8th rule that doesn't work. Minimalism means never buying anything on sale. This advice comes from a reasonable place. Sales manipulate us into buying things we don't need just because the price is reduced. But the pendulum has swung too far into an absolute prohibition that ignores reality. Sales on things you genuinely need save money. If you need new running shoes and find quality running shoes at 30% off, you're not being manipulated, you're being strategic. Waiting for sales on planned purchases is good financial management, not anti-minimalist behavior. Bulk buying on sale reduces trips, packaging, and cost per use. Stocking up on household essentials when prices drop is more sustainable and more affordable than buying small quantities at full price repeatedly. The never buy on sale rule can actually backfire into paying more. If you need something and refuse to buy it on sale because sales are manipulative, you end up paying full price for the same item. The logic defeats itself. The issue isn't sales, it's unplanned purchasing triggered by sales. Buying things you don't need because they're discounted is problematic. Buying things you do need at the best available price is rational. What works instead? Distinguish between need-driven purchases that happen to be on sale and sale-driven purchases that create artificial need. The first category is smart shopping. The second is what minimalism should help you avoid. Before any sale purchase, ask, would I buy this at full price if I needed it? If the answer is yes, buying it on sale is a win. If the answer is no, the sale is creating desire rather than satisfying existing need. The 9th rule that doesn't work. You should be able to move with just a few boxes. Minimalist content romanticizes extreme portability, the ability to fit your entire life into a backpack, a few suitcases, or a small moving van. This flexibility is presented as the ultimate goal, proof of successful minimalism. For most people, this goal makes no sense. If you're not planning to move frequently, optimizing for moving is absurd. Owning furniture that serves you well in a home you'll stay in for years makes more sense than owning minimal furniture so that moving would be easier if you hypothetically moved. Roots have value. The art on your walls, the kitchen equipment you've accumulated, the comfortable home you've built. These create quality of life daily. Sacrificing daily quality for theoretical future portability is a bad trade for anyone who isn't actually planning to be nomadic. The advice also ignores different life stages. A 25-year-old who might relocate for career opportunities has different considerations than a 45-year-old with established community, children in school, and career stability. Optimizing for portability makes sense for the first person. It makes no sense for the second. And genuine portability requires significant income. The people who travel with just a backpack rely on being able to buy or rent what they need wherever they go. That lifestyle requires financial resources that most minimalism content doesn't acknowledge. What works instead? Match your possessions to your actual life circumstances rather than an idealized nomadic fantasy. If you're settled, own the things that make settled life good. If you're genuinely mobile or planning to become mobile, optimize for that reality. The question isn't, could I move easily, but am I living well in my actual current situation? The 10th rule that doesn't work. Minimalism is about owning as little as possible. This misunderstanding underlies most of the other failed rules. Somewhere along the way, minimalism became a competition to own the least, a race to the bottom where success means maximum deprivation. This competitive minimalism misses the entire point. The goal was never fewer things. The goal was better life. Minimalism arose as a response to consumerism that made people stressed, cluttered, and constantly wanting more. The intention was removing what detracts from well-being so that what remains serves you better. But obsessing over owning less can create its own stress. Constantly evaluating possessions, feeling guilty about items that don't meet arbitrary minimalist standards, rebuying things you eliminated too hastily, these experiences degrade quality of life rather than improving it. The optimal number of possessions varies enormously between individuals. A professional musician might need dozens of items related to their craft. A person with multiple hobbies needs equipment for those hobbies. A family with children needs vastly more than a single adult. None of these people are failing at minimalism. They're living lives that require more things. Forced scarcity isn't freedom. Freedom is having what you need without being overwhelmed by excess. For some people, that means very few possessions. For others, it means quite a lot. The number itself doesn't determine success. What works instead? Reframe minimalism as sufficiency rather than scarcity. The question isn't, how little can I own? But, do I have what I need without being burdened by excess? This framing allows for individual variation. It acknowledges that different lives require different resources. It focuses on the purpose of minimalism, a life that works well, rather than fetishizing the method of owning less. These 10 rules fail because they prioritize ideology over practicality. Real minimalism isn't a set of rigid rules to follow. It's a framework for asking better questions about your possessions and consumption. Questions like, does this serve me? Does it add value? Would I notice if it were gone? Am I keeping this out of guilt or obligation rather than genuine usefulness? The answers to these questions vary by person, by season, by life stage, by circumstance. Rigid rules can't capture that variation. Only thoughtful individual evaluation can. Here's what actually works. A mindset of continuous, gentle curation rather than dramatic intervention. Regular, small evaluations rather than annual purges. Flexibility to adapt as your life changes. Permission to own what you need without guilt or justification. This approach doesn't make good content. It doesn't produce dramatic before and after photos. You can't summarize it in a catchy rule, but it actually improves life, which is supposed to be the point. The people I know who successfully simplified their lives didn't follow rules religiously. They developed judgment about what serves them and what doesn't. They learned to recognize the difference between genuinely useful possessions and accumulation that creates burden. That judgment can't be reduced to a formula like 6 months or 33 items. Keeping track of everything you own and whether each item serves you is genuinely difficult. These simplistic rules attempt to shortcut that difficulty, but shortcuts that produce regret aren't actually shortcuts. The slower path of developing real discernment saves more time in the end by eliminating the cycle of purging and rebuying. Everything in this video is financial literacy applied to physical possessions. The connection might not be obvious, but how you manage stuff and how you manage money are deeply related. Both require distinguishing between genuine needs and manufactured wants. Both require understanding true cost, not just purchase price, but ongoing costs of ownership. Both benefit from systems that make good decisions automatic rather than requiring constant willpower. The person who understands cost per use when evaluating purchases makes better decisions about both keeping and acquiring. The person who can resist artificial urgency from sales does better with both decluttering pressure and spending pressure. The person who evaluates possessions based on how they serve actual life applies the same thinking to financial decisions. I made a complete breakdown of financial literacy that covers these connections: how to think clearly about what serves you, how to avoid manipulation by marketing and trends, how to build systems that support good decisions automatically. If this video helped you recognize minimalist rules that were working against you rather than for you, that video will give you the complete framework for aligning your money and your possessions with the life you actually want. Because here's what minimalism and money have in common. Both are tools in service of good living. Neither is the goal itself. The person who hoards possessions and the person who competes to own nothing are both missing the point. The person who obsesses over savings rates and the person who never thinks about money are both making errors. The goal is enough. Enough money, enough stuff, enough security, without letting the pursuit of more consume the life it was supposed to enable. Most people who try minimalism eventually abandon it because the rules feel impossible. They conclude that minimalism isn't for them. What they don't realize is that the rules were the problem, not the underlying concept. Intentionality about possessions genuinely improves life. Rigid rules that ignore individual circumstances do the opposite. You don't have to follow rules that weren't designed for your life. You can take what works about minimalism, the thoughtfulness, the intentionality, the focus on what actually matters, and leave the arbitrary restrictions that create more problems than they solve. Your possessions should serve your life. Any minimalist rule that makes your life harder is failing at the only test that matters. Now you know which rules to ignore. What you do with that freedom is up to you. Now you know which rules to ignore. The question becomes what to replace them with. What I'm about to share is the complete framework. These are the foundational minimalist money rules that everything else builds on. If you only remember one concept from this entire video, make it the one I'm about to explain first. It's called the hidden second cost of everything you own. Once you understand it, you'll never look at a purchase the same way again. I want you to picture two apartments. Same city, same neighborhood, similar rent. The first apartment belongs to someone earning $95,000 per year. Walk inside and you'll find a 75-inch television mounted on the wall, a leather sectional that cost $4,000, a kitchen full of appliances, most still in their original boxes, closets overflowing with clothes, many with tags still attached, a spare bedroom converted into storage for items that haven't been touched in years. This person checks their bank account with a knot in their stomach. They're 2 missed paychecks away from crisis. The second apartment belongs to someone earning $52,000 per year. Walk inside and you'll notice space, a modest couch, a reasonably sized television, a kitchen with exactly the tools that get used regularly, a closet with clothes that actually get worn. The spare bedroom is actually a bedroom. This person checks their bank account with calm confidence. They have 18 months of expenses saved and invest 20% of every paycheck. Same neighborhood. The person earning almost half as much has nearly 10 times the financial security. This isn't a story about income. It's a story about the hidden relationship between stuff and money that most people never understand. The first person isn't bad with money in any obvious way. They don't gamble, they don't have expensive addictions. They just gradually accumulated a lifestyle that requires every dollar they earn to maintain. The second person discovered something that changed everything. They learned that owning less doesn't mean living worse. It means living deliberately. And deliberate living creates financial margin that most high earners never experience. Today, I'm going to walk you through the minimalist money rules that separate people who always have money from people who never do, regardless of income. These aren't about deprivation. They're about understanding that every object you own has ongoing costs you've probably never calculated. Let me start with a concept that will reframe how you think about every purchase you make for the rest of your life. Everything you own costs money twice. The first cost is obvious. It's the purchase price, the number on the receipt. But there's a second cost that most people completely ignore, and it's often larger than the first. The second cost includes storage, maintenance, mental energy, and opportunity cost. That treadmill you bought requires space in your home. Space costs money. roughly $30 to $50 per square foot annually in most urban areas. A treadmill takes up about 20 square feet when you account for clearance space. That's $600 to $1,000 per year in implicit rent you're paying to store exercise equipment that probably hangs clothes most days. The second cost also includes maintenance and upkeep. That boat sitting in your driveway needs winterization, cleaning, registration, insurance, and occasional repairs. The industry rule of thumb suggests annual maintenance costs run about 10% of the boat's value. A $30,000 boat costs $3,000 per year just to own, even if you never take it on the water. I am not done yet. The second cost includes mental energy too. Every item you own occupies a small slice of your attention. It needs to be cleaned, organized, maintained, insured, worried about, and eventually disposed of. Researchers have found that visual clutter increases cortisol levels and reduces the brain's ability to focus. Your stuff is literally stressing you out in ways you can't consciously perceive. Nope, not over yet. The second cost includes opportunity cost. Every dollar locked up in possessions is a dollar not invested. That $15,000 home gym equipment setup could have been $15,000 in index funds, growing to $50,000 or more over 15 years. You didn't just buy a home gym. You bought a home gym instead of future financial freedom. When you add up these hidden costs, many possessions cost more to own than they cost to buy. The purchase price is just the entry fee. The ongoing costs continue for as long as you possess the item. Minimalists understand this intuitively. They're not avoiding possessions because they hate nice things. They're avoiding possessions because they've calculated the true cost and decided most things aren't worth it. This leads to the first rule that minimalists follow religiously. Rule 1. Calculate cost per use before any purchase. Before buying anything, estimate how many times you'll realistically use it. Divide the total cost by that number. This gives you the cost per use, which is the only honest measure of value. A $200 jacket worn twice costs $100 per wear. A $400 jacket worn 200 times costs $2 per wear. The expensive jacket is actually cheaper in any meaningful sense. This calculation destroys most impulse purchases immediately. That $300 kitchen gadget you'll use twice a year costs $150 per use over the first year. That's an obscenely expensive way to accomplish whatever task it performs. Meanwhile, a $30 tool you use weekly costs less than 60 cents per use over the first year. Cost per use also reveals which purchases are genuinely worthwhile. A $2,000 mattress used every night for 10 years costs about 55 cents per use. That's extraordinary value for something affecting your health and energy every single day. A $1,500 espresso machine used daily for 5 years costs less than $1 per use, likely saving money compared to coffee shop visits. The math cuts through marketing, emotion, and social pressure. It reveals what actually makes financial sense versus what just feels appealing in the moment. Rule 2. Apply the replacement test to everything you already own. Walk through your home and look at each item you possess. Ask yourself a simple question. If this item disappeared today, would I spend money to replace it? Be honest. Would you actually go buy another fondue set? Would you replace that bread maker collecting dust in the cabinet? Would you repurchase those clothes you haven't worn in 18 months? For most items, the honest answer is no. You would not replace them. They exist in your life through inertia, not intention. They were impulse purchases, gifts you felt obligated to keep, or remnants of past hobbies and phases you've moved beyond. These items have negative value. They cost you space, mental energy, and maintenance without providing corresponding benefit. Every hour spent organizing, cleaning around, or thinking about items you wouldn't replace is an hour stolen from activities that actually matter. Minimalists ruthlessly eliminate items that fail the replacement test. They sell what has value, donate what someone else could use, and discard what serves nobody. The process feels uncomfortable initially, and then liberating once complete. The psychological weight of owning things you don't want or need is substantial. Removing that weight creates mental space that's difficult to describe, but immediately noticeable. Rooms feel larger. Decisions feel simpler. Cleaning takes half the time. You know where everything is because everything remaining has a purpose. Rule 3. Never upgrade out of boredom. There's a pattern I see constantly among people who earn good incomes but have nothing to show for it. They upgrade perfectly functional items simply because they're bored with them or because newer versions exist. Their television works perfectly, but the new model has slightly better contrast. Their phone operates flawlessly, but the new release has a marginally improved camera. Their car runs reliably, but the New Year's model has updated styling. Their furniture serves its purpose, but they've grown tired of looking at it. These upgrades feel like improvements. They're actually wealth destruction disguised as progress. Minimalists maintain a strict policy: never replace something that functions properly. The phone that makes calls, sends messages, and runs apps does not need replacement because a newer phone exists. The car that reliably transports you does not need replacement because the neighbor bought something shinier. This policy saves enormous sums over a lifetime. The average American replaces their phone every 2 to 3 years, often while the previous phone works perfectly. Over 30 years, this pattern costs $30,000 to $50,000 in unnecessary purchases. Applied across all categories where upgrade culture operates, the lifetime waste easily exceeds $200,000. Minimalists escape this trap by defining functional clearly. An item remains functional until it genuinely fails to serve its purpose. Boredom is not failure. Desire for novelty is not failure. The existence of newer alternatives is not failure. Actual mechanical breakdown or genuine inability to perform required tasks is failure. Everything else is marketing convincing you to solve problems you don't have. Rule 4. Create friction for spending and ease for saving. Human behavior follows the path of least resistance. If spending is easy and saving is difficult, you'll spend. If saving is easy and spending is difficult, you'll save. Minimalists engineer their environment to make the right choice the easy choice. Spending friction looks like removing stored credit card numbers from online retailers, requiring a 24-hour waiting period before any non-essential purchase, deleting shopping apps from your phone, unsubscribing from promotional emails, and avoiding stores unless you have a specific intended purchase. Saving ease looks like automatic transfers to investment accounts on payday, keeping only small amounts in easily accessible checking, making investment contributions happen before you see the money, and treating savings like a fixed expense rather than an afterthought. These structural changes matter more than willpower. Willpower depletes throughout the day. Environment is constant. Someone relying on willpower to avoid impulse purchases will eventually fail when they're tired, stressed, or emotional. Someone who deleted the shopping apps and removed their credit cards simply cannot impulse purchase in that moment. Minimalists don't trust themselves to consistently make good decisions. They design systems that make good decisions automatic. The 24-hour waiting rule alone eliminates roughly 70% of impulse purchases. Most desires for objects fade within a day if not acted upon immediately. Rule 5. Count your possessions regularly. This sounds obsessive until you actually do it. Counting forces awareness. Awareness prevents accumulation. Pick a category. Count how many items you own in that category. Write it down. The numbers often shock people who've never examined their consumption patterns objectively. How many shirts do you own? Most people guess low and discover they have 3 or 4 times what they estimated. How many kitchen gadgets? How many pairs of shoes? How many items in your junk drawer? How many books you'll never read again? The count itself changes behavior. Once you know you own 47 shirts, buying another feels different. You're not adding a shirt. You're bringing your collection to 48. The absurdity becomes visible. Minimalists track key categories over time. They set maximum thresholds. Perhaps 30 items of clothing total. Perhaps 15 books at any given time. Perhaps a one-in, one-out policy, where any new purchase requires removing something existing. These constraints prevent lifestyle creep. Without intentional limits, possessions expand to fill available space. With limits, each addition requires a conscious decision about what it's replacing. That friction alone dramatically reduces acquisition. Rule 6. Rent or borrow before you buy. Most items people purchase get used intensively for a short period and then rarely afterward. The excitement of newness fades. The initial enthusiasm decreases. The item joins the collection of things owned but seldom touched. Minimalists test this pattern by renting or borrowing before committing to ownership. Want to get into camping? Rent equipment for the first few trips. Want to try woodworking? Borrow tools from a friend or use a makerspace. Want a kayak? Rent several times before purchasing. This approach accomplishes 2 things. First, it reveals whether the enthusiasm is genuine or temporary. Many interests fade after the initial exploration. Better to discover this while renting than after purchasing equipment that collects dust indefinitely. Second, it clarifies exactly what you need. First-time campers often buy too much or buy the wrong things. Renting lets you learn before committing. When you eventually purchase, you buy precisely what's necessary rather than guessing. The buy-first mentality costs people enormously over their lifetimes. Closets and garages across America contain dusty remnants of abandoned hobbies. Ski equipment from the phase when they thought they'd ski regularly. Photography gear from when they imagined becoming serious photographers. Music equipment from bands that played 2 shows. Minimalists avoid becoming museums of past enthusiasm. They test interests before investing. They maintain the flexibility to explore without the burden of ownership. Rule 7. Understand the lifestyle multiplier effect. Every possession you own connects to other possessions. A boat requires a trailer, a hitch-equipped vehicle, storage fees, maintenance supplies, safety equipment, and appropriate clothing. A purchase that seems singular actually triggers a cascade of supporting purchases. This is the lifestyle multiplier. Major purchases multiply into ecosystems of related expenses. The true cost is never just the item itself. Watch how this plays out with common purchases. A home gym requires flooring, mirrors, storage solutions, ventilation considerations, and often renovations to make the space suitable. A pool requires chemical supplies, cleaning equipment, covers, furniture, maintenance tools, and often landscaping to complement the installation. A motorcycle requires gear, storage, maintenance equipment, and often a truck or trailer for transportation to riding locations. Minimalists calculate the full ecosystem cost before any major purchase. They know that a $5,000 purchase might actually represent $8,000 or $12,000 when all the multiplier expenses are included. This full accounting often transforms what seemed like a reasonable purchase into something clearly excessive. The multiplier effect also works in reverse. Eliminating one major possession often eliminates an entire category of related expenses. Selling the boat means no more storage fees, insurance, registration, maintenance, or towing costs. The savings extend far beyond the item's value. Rule 8. Define enough before you start earning. Here's something that traps high earners constantly. They never define what enough looks like, so they keep purchasing more without ever arriving at satisfaction. Their income increases, so they upgrade their lifestyle. The new lifestyle becomes normal, so they need another income increase to feel progress. This cycle continues indefinitely. People earning $300,000 feel just as financially stressed as people earning $80,000 because their expectations and expenses expanded alongside their income. Minimalists break this cycle by defining enough before they start earning. They decide in advance what kind of home is sufficient, what kind of car meets their needs, what level of material comfort constitutes genuine satisfaction. Then they earn toward that target rather than constantly moving the goalpost. This might mean deciding that a $350,000 home is enough, even if you eventually could afford $600,000. It might mean deciding that a $30,000 car is enough, even when colleagues drive $70,000 vehicles. It might mean deciding that your current wardrobe is enough, even as your income could support constant upgrades. Defining enough creates a finish line. Without it, you're running an endless race where lifestyle expansion always outpaces income growth. With it, you reach a point where additional income flows entirely to saving and investing rather than consumption. The person who defined enough at $60,000 of annual spending and then started earning $150,000 builds wealth at an extraordinary rate. The $90,000 difference between income and enough goes directly to financial freedom. Meanwhile, someone earning the same $150,000 but constantly redefining enough upward might save almost nothing. Rule 9. Measure wealth by optionality, not accumulation. The conventional view measures wealth by what you have: houses, cars, possessions, visible markers of success. Minimalists measure wealth differently. They measure it by what they can choose. Can you leave a job that's destroying your mental health? Can you take 6 months off to handle a family emergency? Can you move to a new city for a relationship? Can you start a business without guaranteed income? Can you retire before 65? Can you say no to opportunities that pay well but compromise your values? These options represent true wealth. They're only available to people who've built substantial margin between their income and expenses. The person earning $200,000 but spending $195,000 has almost no optionality. They're chained to their income requirement. The person earning $80,000 but spending $45,000 has extraordinary optionality. They can absorb disruptions, take risks, and make choices based on preference rather than financial necessity. Minimalists understand that optionality requires liquid resources more than physical possessions. The money tied up in a car you don't need is money that can't buy your freedom when you need it. The home equity locked in excess house is equity that can't fund a career transition or extended sabbatical. This perspective transforms spending decisions. Each purchase isn't just exchanging money for an object, it's trading optionality for possession. Is this item worth reducing your ability to make free choices about your life? Sometimes yes, often no. Rule 10. Practice cyclical decluttering rather than annual purging. Most people who attempt minimalism do a massive purge, feel great for a few weeks, and then gradually accumulate back to their starting point. The purge feels productive. The gradual reaccumulation goes unnoticed. Within 2 years, they're right back where they started. Minimalists avoid this pattern through cyclical decluttering. Rather than annual massive purges, they perform small, regular reviews. Weekly glances at incoming items, monthly evaluation of one category, quarterly assessment of overall accumulation trends. This cyclical approach catches accumulation early, before it rebuilds to overwhelming levels. Removing 3 items per week is manageable and sustainable. Removing 300 items once per year feels overwhelming and often gets postponed indefinitely. The cyclical approach also maintains awareness. When you evaluate your possessions regularly, you notice patterns. You see which categories tend to grow. You identify which emotional states trigger acquisition. You recognize which marketing tactics work on you specifically. This awareness enables prevention rather than just treatment. Let me give you a practical implementation of these rules that you can start today. This week, walk through your home with the replacement test in mind. Identify 10 items you would not replace if they disappeared. Sell, donate, or discard those items. Notice how it feels to remove things you don't actually want. This month, implement the 24-hour rule for all non-essential purchases. Track how many purchase desires survive the waiting period versus how many evaporate. The data will reveal how much of your spending is impulsive rather than intentional. This quarter, count your possessions in 3 categories that tend to accumulate. For most people, clothing, kitchen items, and media or entertainment are useful starting points. Set a maximum threshold for each category based on what you actually use. This year, define what enough looks like across major spending categories. What home is sufficient? What transportation is adequate? What wardrobe meets your genuine needs? Write these definitions down. Refer to them when temptation arises to exceed your own standards. The financial transformation from these practices compounds over time. Someone who applies these rules consistently for 5 years accumulates substantially less while saving substantially more. The gap between their lifestyle and their income creates wealth that can't be built any other way. Here's what nobody tells you about minimalism and money. The relationship is bidirectional. Owning less creates more money, but having more money also makes owning less feel natural. When your savings account is robust and your investments are growing, the urge to accumulate diminishes. The psychological need that drives most consumption, the need for security and status, gets satisfied by financial strength rather than physical possessions. You don't need the stuff to feel successful because your bank account already tells you the story you want to hear. People trapped in consumption cycles often can't explain why they buy so much. The truth is usually that spending temporarily fills an emotional void that financial insecurity creates. Address the insecurity through actual financial strength, and the compulsion to spend often dissolves on its own. This creates a virtuous cycle. Spending less leads to saving more. Saving more creates security. Security reduces the emotional drive to spend. Reduced spending accelerates saving further. Each turn of the cycle reinforces the next. The opposite cycle is equally powerful but destructive. Spending everything creates insecurity. Insecurity drives more spending as temporary emotional relief. More spending deepens insecurity. The cycle continues until some external shock forces a breaking point. The choice between these cycles determines financial trajectory more than income ever could. High earners trapped in the destructive cycle build nothing. Modest earners riding the virtuous cycle build everything. The minimalist rules I've outlined aren't about suffering or deprivation. They're about recognizing that most consumption doesn't actually improve life satisfaction. Research consistently shows that beyond a baseline of security and comfort, additional purchases contribute minimally to well-being. Yet most people spend as if happiness scales linearly with spending. Minimalists align their behavior with this research. They spend enough to be comfortable and then redirect the excess toward freedom rather than accumulation. They end up with less stuff and more life. That apartment I described at the beginning, the one belonging to someone earning $52,000 with 18 months of savings, belongs to someone applying these rules consistently. They didn't get there through exceptional income. They got there through exceptional clarity about what actually matters. The other apartment, the one belonging to someone earning $95,000 whose 2 paychecks from crisis, belongs to someone who never questioned the assumption that more stuff equals better life. Both lifestyles are available to you regardless of what you currently earn. The choice is simply whether you want to own your possessions or whether you're comfortable with your possessions owning you. The math strongly favors the first option. So does the peace of mind. Those rules are the foundation. They change how you think about money. What comes next changes what you actually do with it every single day. The gap between knowing the right principles and practicing the right habits is where most people lose. These are the specific daily behaviors, the boring, unglamorous, nobody posts about them on Instagram habits that turn minimalist principles into real dollars saved. Some of these saved me thousands of dollars in a single year. You're not bad with money. You're just bleeding it in places you've never thought to look. That subscription you forgot about 3 months ago is still charging. The convenience purchases that feel insignificant are adding up to hundreds monthly. The lifestyle upgrades that happen so gradually you didn't notice them, they're consuming raises before the raises even hit your account. You earn decent money, more than you did 5 years ago, and yet somehow the savings account looks roughly the same. The progress toward financial goals feels stuck. The gap between what you make and what you keep seems to widen no matter what you do. Here's what I've learned after years of obsessing over where money actually goes. Most people don't have an income problem. They have a leakage problem. Money flows out through dozens of tiny holes they've never identified, never measured, never plugged. This video covers 20 frugal habits that saved me thousands of dollars, not through painful deprivation, but through seeing clearly where money was disappearing and making small changes that compounded dramatically over time. Some of these habits I still follow religiously. A few of them I took too far and now regret. I'll tell you which ones crossed the line so you can find the balance that works for your life. By the end of this video, you'll look at your own spending differently. You'll spot leaks you didn't know existed, and you'll have specific, actionable changes you can make starting today. The first habit changed everything else. I stopped eating out except for genuinely special occasions. For about 3 years, my wife and I ate at restaurants maybe 2 or 3 times per year. Not per month, per year. That sounds extreme because it is. But when you're serious about building financial freedom, the math becomes undeniable. The average American household spends over $3,600 annually on food away from home. A casual $50 to $100 per week on restaurants, which doesn't even feel like going out that much, adds up to $2,600 to $5,200 per year. We redirected all of that money towards savings and investments. Over 3 years, that single habit contributed over $10,000 to our net worth, before accounting for the returns those investments generated. I'll be honest about the trade-off. We missed some social experiences. There were dinner invitations we turned down. It required being comfortable with being different from our friends. But here's what I learned. You can still have a social life without restaurants. Hosting dinner at home, meeting for coffee instead of meals, suggesting free activities. The relationships that mattered survived. The ones that required expensive outings to maintain probably weren't that deep to begin with. Related to eating out, we transformed how we handled food at home through aggressive meal planning and bulk cooking. Every Sunday, we'd plan the entire week's meals, buy only what we needed, and cook large batches that would last multiple days. Rice, beans, chicken, potatoes, vegetables, simple ingredients prepared in bulk. This habit attacked multiple money leaks simultaneously. Food waste dropped to nearly zero. The average American household throws away over $1,000 of food annually. When you plan precisely and cook what you buy, that waste disappears. Impulse grocery purchases stopped. When you shop with a specific list for specific meals, you're not wandering aisles adding random items. Takeout temptation vanished. When there's already food prepared at home, the friction of ordering delivery becomes obvious. You'd be paying 3 times as much for something less convenient than opening your refrigerator. I'll admit we took this one too far. For several years, we ate chicken breast with rice or beans almost every single day. It was the cheapest form of protein we could find. The savings were significant, probably a few $1,000s over those years. But I genuinely don't enjoy chicken anymore. I overexpose myself to the point where it's no longer appealing. That's a real cost that doesn't show up in any budget spreadsheet. Find the sustainable version of meal planning that works for your life. One habit that required zero ongoing effort was automating savings before I could spend them. Most people save whatever is left at the end of the month. This is backwards, and it's why most people never save enough. There's always something that consumes the leftover. An unexpected expense, a social obligation, a purchase that felt justified in the moment. The fix is simple. Move money to savings and investments automatically, the same day your paycheck arrives. Before you see it, before you can spend it, before your brain even registers it as available. I set up automatic transfers to savings accounts and investment accounts that triggered on payday. The money disappeared before I could make decisions about it. My spending naturally adjusted to what remained. This works because it removes willpower from the equation. You're not fighting yourself every month about whether to save. The system handles it. Your job is just to live on what's left. In 2026, high-yield savings accounts are paying 4 to 5% APY. Your automated savings can earn real returns while sitting in an accessible emergency fund. Another habit that costs nothing but saves hundreds annually. I learned to negotiate bills like they were suggestions rather than fixed prices. Your internet bill, your phone plan, your insurance premiums, your subscription services. These companies raise prices constantly because they assume you won't notice or won't bother to push back. Spending 1 hour comparing rates, threatening to cancel, or actually switching providers can save you hundreds of dollars per year. 1 hour of effort for several $100s in savings. You will never find another use of time that pays this well. I call my internet provider annually and tell them I'm considering switching to a competitor. Almost every time, they offer a discount or promotional rate to keep me. The same approach works for insurance. Getting quotes from competitors often triggers price matching. In 2026, comparison tools make this even easier. You can get competing quotes for insurance in minutes. The information asymmetry that companies used to exploit has largely disappeared. Use it. One of the biggest savings came from a decision most people consider non-negotiable. We lived with one car for years. Even with a paid-off vehicle, car ownership costs thousands annually. Insurance, registration, maintenance, repairs, depreciation, fuel. A second car that sits in the driveway most of the time is bleeding money constantly. We did the math and realized our second car was being driven maybe twice a week. The annual cost of ownership divided by actual use made each trip absurdly expensive. We sold the second car and made it work with one. Was it inconvenient sometimes? Yes. It required coordination and occasional creativity, but the savings were substantial. Easily $3,000 to $4,000 annually that went straight to investments instead of sitting in the driveway depreciating. This isn't possible for every household. If both partners commute to different locations daily, you need 2 vehicles. But if you work from home, or if your schedules allow sharing, run the numbers. The cost of occasional inconvenience might be far lower than the cost of a vehicle you barely use. When we did have cars, we always paid cash for reliable used vehicles. I started with a $5,000 Honda Civic that I saved for years to buy outright. My wife had a similar vintage Toyota. Nothing fancy, nothing impressive. just reliable transportation that didn't come with monthly payments. The average new car payment in 2026 exceeds $770 monthly. That's over $9,000 annually, before insurance, fuel, and maintenance, going toward a depreciating asset. We took that $9,000 and invested it instead. Over 10 years at average market returns, that's roughly $150,000 in wealth that most people trade for slightly nicer transportation. Buy reliable used cars in cash. Drive them until they're truly done. The freedom from car payments is worth more than the status of a newer model. Housing was where we made the most aggressive move. House hacking. We bought a 3-unit multifamily property with a first-time homebuyer FHA loan at 3.5% down. We lived in one unit and rented out the other two. The rental income covered our entire mortgage payment, meaning our housing cost effectively dropped to zero. Most people spend 30% or more of their income on housing. We spent 0%. That difference went directly to savings and investments, accelerating our timeline dramatically. We took it even further. One of our units had 4 separate bedrooms, so we added a bathroom and rented each bedroom individually on Airbnb. That generated about $2,000 monthly in profit, after mortgage, taxes, and insurance, while we lived in the same building. This single strategy is probably what allowed me to leave my day job years earlier than would have otherwise been possible. When your largest expense disappears, everything else becomes easier. House hacking isn't for everyone. It requires being a landlord, dealing with tenants, maintaining property. But if you're willing to do the work, it's one of the most powerful wealth-building strategies available to people without large starting capital. I also learned to DIY almost everything related to home maintenance and improvement. When we bought that first property, I had never done anything beyond painting a room. I taught myself to tile showers, install flooring, do basic plumbing and electrical work, refinish cabinets, and handle dozens of other repairs. Between the apartments we renovated, DIY saved us tens of thousands of dollars. A contractor would have charged $300 to install a toilet. I learned to do it in an hour by watching YouTube tutorials. A professional tile job would have cost thousands. I did it myself over a weekend for the cost of materials. These skills compound over time. Every repair you learn to do yourself is a repair you'll never pay for again. Over a lifetime of homeownership, the savings are enormous. The barrier to DIY is mostly psychological. People assume they can't do it because they've never done it. But most home repairs are far simpler than they appear. Start with easy projects: replacing a faucet, fixing a running toilet, patching drywall. Build confidence. Gradually take on more complex work. For furnishing and home improvement materials, we relied heavily on thrift stores and dented and dinged sections. When we needed paint, we bought it from thrift stores, often for a few dollars per gallon instead of $30 or $40. When we needed appliances, we bought from the clearance sections at home improvement stores, where items with cosmetic damage sell for 50% off or more. I actually turned this into a side hustle for a while. Every time I went to Lowe's, I'd check the dented and dinged section. If there was an appliance priced significantly below retail, I'd buy it, load it in my car, and resell it for profit. The margin on a scratched refrigerator that functions perfectly can be several $100s. Your appliances are going to get scratched and dented eventually anyway. Paying full price for pristine items that will acquire cosmetic damage within months of normal use makes no financial sense. On technology, I avoided the upgrade cycle entirely by buying refurbished devices. For years, I used refurbished Google Pixel phones that cost around $100 on Amazon. They did 98% of what flagship phones did. The camera was slightly worse. The processor was slightly slower. The text bubbles were green instead of blue. None of that mattered for my actual daily use. I saved roughly $800 to $1,000 per phone cycle, compared to people buying new iPhones every 2 years. I only switched to a newer phone when I became a content creator and genuinely needed better camera quality. That was a tool for generating income, not a status purchase. Most people upgrade phones, laptops, and other electronics far more frequently than necessary. Before any tech purchase, ask yourself, does my current device actually fail to do something I need? Or do I just want something newer? We implemented a strict no gifts policy with family and friends. Every birthday, every holiday, people feel obligated to buy each other random items that the recipient will donate or throw away within 6 months. It's a wealth transfer to retailers disguised as affection. We told our family directly, we're not buying you gifts, and please don't buy us gifts. If we want to celebrate together, let's share a meal or an experience. But we're done with the ritual exchange of stuff nobody actually wants. This was socially awkward at first. People were surprised. Some were mildly offended. But over time, everyone adapted. The holidays became less stressful, less cluttered, and significantly less expensive. We still do gifts for kids. They're young enough that the experience genuinely matters. But between adults, the obligation gift-giving has stopped. That saves hundreds of dollars annually, while actually improving the quality of our celebrations. A small habit with surprisingly large impact. I stopped paying for drinks almost entirely. Bottled water, coffee, soda, juice, these are some of the highest margin products retailers sell. The markup on a $2 bottle of water is astronomical. The $4 coffee represents a few cents of beans and milk. I carry a water bottle everywhere. I make coffee at home. At restaurants, I order water. The savings seem trivial on any individual purchase, but they compound to hundreds or thousands annually. A daily $5 coffee habit costs over $1,800 per year. That same money invested for 30 years at average market returns becomes roughly $40,000. The coffee isn't bad. The opportunity cost is. I track every dollar that comes in and goes out. Not obsessively, but consistently. Most people think they know where their money goes. Almost nobody actually does. When you start tracking spending, even for 1 month, you uncover subscriptions you forgot about, fees you didn't notice, categories that are double what you estimated. I use a simple spreadsheet, though apps work fine too. The specific tool matters less than the habit. Knowing where your money goes is the foundation of controlling where your money goes. Tracking reveals patterns you can't see otherwise. You notice that grocery spending spikes on days you shop hungry. You realize that certain social situations reliably trigger impulse purchases. You discover that entire categories you considered essential are actually optional. Once you see that you're spending $400 monthly on food delivery, you can't unsee it. The number creates its own pressure toward change. Related to tracking, I became obsessive about eliminating fees. Bank fees, late fees, ATM fees, subscription renewal fees, convenience fees. These charges are designed to be small enough that you don't complain, but they add up to a significant drain over time. Americans pay an average of over $300 annually just in bank fees for the privilege of a bank holding their money. That's pure waste. I switched to no-fee bank accounts. I set up auto-pay on everything to avoid late fees. I never use out-of-network ATMs. I review subscriptions monthly and cancel anything I'm not actively using. These changes required maybe an hour of setup and a few minutes of ongoing attention monthly. The savings compound forever. Before any non-essential purchase, I apply a waiting period, what some people call the 30-day rule. When I want something that isn't a genuine necessity, I write it down and wait. 7 days for small purchases, 30 days for moderate ones, 90 days for anything significant. What happens during the waiting period is fascinating. Most desires simply fade. The thing that felt urgent and necessary gradually loses its grip. By the time the waiting period ends, you often can't remember why you wanted it so badly. This rule saves money not by forbidding purchases, but by exposing which desires were genuine and which were momentary impulses. The purchases that survive the waiting period are usually ones you genuinely value. We also experimented with no-spend challenges, periods where we bought absolutely nothing beyond true essentials. A no-spend day is easy. Just don't buy anything except what's genuinely necessary. A no-spend week is harder, but manageable. A no-spend month is a complete reset that reveals how much habitual spending you don't notice. During these challenges, you discover how often you spend out of boredom rather than need. You realize how many purchases are attempts to solve emotional problems that money can't fix. After a no-spend month, your habits are different. The automatic impulse to buy has been interrupted. You return to normal life with clearer vision and more intentional spending. One principle I apply to everything. I calculate cost per use before buying. A $50 shirt worn 50 times costs $1 per use. A $100 jacket worn 200 times costs 50 cents per use. But a $20 sale item worn twice costs $10 per use, making it more expensive than the higher-priced alternatives. This reframes value completely. The question isn't, is this cheap? The question is, how much will each use cost? This calculation often justifies spending more on things you'll use heavily. Quality items with long lifespans and frequent use are actually cheaper than budget items you'll replace repeatedly. It also reveals purchases that never make sense regardless of price. A ski jacket for someone who skis once every 3 years will have terrible cost per use no matter how discounted it is. Speaking of renting instead of owning, I joined Buy Nothing and local sharing groups for items I needed temporarily. Need a ladder for a one-day project? Borrow it. Need a drill for a single repair? Someone nearby has one they're not using. Need a stroller for visiting family? It's available without buying. These groups create microeconomies where spending becomes optional. You share what you don't use, others share with you. The transaction costs disappear. The need to own every possible tool vanishes. This is particularly powerful for things you'll use rarely: camping equipment, specialty tools, occasion-specific items. Owning means paying full price to use them a few times per year. Borrowing means paying nothing. Perhaps the most important habit was avoiding lifestyle inflation despite increasing income. When most people earn more money, they spend more money. A raise leads to a nicer apartment. A bonus leads to a better car. A promotion leads to upgraded everything. Within months, the higher income has been fully absorbed by higher spending, leaving savings unchanged. We intentionally kept our expenses flat, regardless of income growth. When my side hustles started generating additional money, we didn't expand our lifestyle. When YouTube began producing real revenue, we maintained the same baseline expenses we'd had when I was cleaning office buildings. All the additional income went directly to savings and investments. The gap between income and spending widened, accelerating wealth building dramatically. This required constantly resisting the pull toward upgrades. Friends questioned why we still drove the same cars, lived in the same place, maintained the same lifestyle despite obviously earning more. But lifestyle inflation is why high earners often have the same financial stress as low earners. Their spending rises to match whatever they make. The only escape is intentionally keeping expenses disconnected from income. The final habit was side hustle stacking, always having multiple income streams beyond my main job. While cleaning office buildings at night, I simultaneously started a YouTube channel, worked construction during days, and got my real estate license. Most of those side hustles failed. YouTube eventually took off. But the approach was never about any single attempt succeeding. It was about increasing the surface area for luck. The more things you try, the more likely something connects. I gave up video games, TV shows, and most leisure activities for several years to make time for building income streams. Every night and weekend went toward creating something that could eventually replace my job. This sounds extreme because it was. Not everyone wants to sacrifice that much. But if you genuinely hate your main job and want to escape it, the nights and weekends are when you build the exit. Now, let me be honest about what I got wrong. Some of these habits went too far. The chicken everyday diet saved money, but cost me genuine enjoyment of food I used to like. The minimal wedding saved thousands, but left us without photos and memories we now wish we had. The intense focus on frugality during our early years meant missing some experiences that would have been worth the money. Frugality is a tool, not a virtue. The goal was never to spend as little as possible. It was to build freedom and security. When frugality starts costing you things that genuinely matter, it's working against its own purpose. Find the sustainable version of these habits, the ones that save money without making you miserable, the ones you can maintain for years without burning out, and recognize that frugality has diminishing returns. The first 20% of effort, automating savings, eliminating obvious waste, avoiding lifestyle inflation, produces 80% of the results. The extreme measures produce marginal additional savings while consuming disproportionate willpower and joy. Here's what ties all of this together. Every habit I've described is a form of financial literacy in action. Not the textbook kind about compound interest formulas and asset allocation, the practical kind about seeing where money actually goes and making conscious choices about it. Most people never examine their spending at this level. They react to money situations, pay the bill, cover the expense, fund the lifestyle, without understanding the patterns underneath. That lack of awareness costs them thousands annually, year after year, for decades. The people who build real wealth aren't necessarily the ones who earn the most. They're the ones who see clearly where money leaks out and systematically plug those leaks. They're the ones who make spending intentional rather than automatic. I made a complete breakdown of financial literacy that goes deeper on all of this. Not just frugal habits, but the entire system of how money works, how wealth compounds, how to build structures that grow your net worth automatically. If any of these habits resonated, if you recognize leaks in your own finances or saw opportunities you haven't captured, that video will give you the complete framework for making your money work for you instead of disappearing into expenses you barely notice. Most people will watch this video, nod along, and change nothing. They'll keep spending automatically, keep wondering where their money goes, keep feeling like they're not getting ahead despite earning reasonable income. Don't be most people. Pick 3 habits from this video. Implement them this week. Track the savings for 1 month and watch how quickly small changes compound. The leaks in your finances are real. They're costing you thousands, but they're also fixable, often with minimal effort and no sacrifice of things that actually matter to you. The money is there. You just have to stop it from escaping. The habits I just covered work regardless of your income, your age, or where you're starting from. They're universal. What comes next is different. These are the more aggressive frugal habits, the ones that don't just save you a few $100s a month. These are the habits that accelerate wealth building fast enough to reach 6 figures before most people have figured out what a 401k is. Some of these will feel extreme. A few of them might sound unreasonable until you see the math behind them. But every single one of them contributed to saving over $100,000 by age 24. Not through a high salary, not through a lucky break, through daily decisions that most people aren't willing to make. I was 22 years old, sitting on the floor of a studio apartment I'd rented for $730 a month because it was the cheapest thing within 40 minutes of my office, eating a bowl of rice and black beans I'd made in a pot I bought at Goodwill for $3, checking my brokerage account on my phone for the 4th time that week. The number said $61,412. I looked around the apartment. The furniture was secondhand. The couch had a tear in the left cushion that I'd covered with a throw blanket from Target. The TV was a 32-inch Vizio I'd bought refurbished for $89. My car, a 2014 Honda Civic with 117,000 miles, sat outside with a small crack in the windshield I'd been ignoring for 2 months. My wardrobe consisted almost entirely of clothes I'd owned since college. My friends thought I was broke. I was not broke. I was building something they couldn't see. Something that didn't exist on Instagram. Something that lived in an account nobody knew about, growing at a rate that was just starting to bend upward on the compounding curve, gaining momentum that would become unstoppable within a few years. By the time I turned 24, that number crossed $100,000. I need to be upfront about something before we go any further. I didn't inherit this money. Nobody handed me a check. I didn't win a crypto lottery or sell a startup. I graduated college with about $9,000 in student debt and a starting salary of $52,000 at a job I got through a career fair. My parents helped with college tuition partially, which I'm grateful for, but they didn't fund my adult life. There was no trust fund, no safety net, no family money quietly compounding in the background. What I had was 20 habits, 20 boring, unsexy, completely unglamorous habits that most people my age were either ignoring or actively laughing at. Habits that didn't look like wealth building from the outside because they looked like deprivation. Like I was struggling, like I was the friend who couldn't afford to keep up. I could afford to keep up. I chose not to. And that choice, repeated 20 different ways every single day for roughly 2.5 years, is the reason I hit a number that the average American in their 20s has a median retirement savings balance of $42,502 to show for, according to Empower data from January 2026. I hit that number before most of my peers had finished paying off their first credit card. This is not financial advice. This is my story. These are the 20 habits. Every single one of them is something you could start this week with whatever income you currently have. Let's get into it. I automated my investments the day after every paycheck, before I could see the money. This was habit number 1, and it was the foundation underneath everything else. On the 15th and the 30th of every month, $750 left my checking account, automatically, and went into a combination of my employer's 401k and a Roth IRA. I set it up during my first week at work, and I never changed the amount until I got my first raise, at which point I increased it. I never saw that money. It never entered my spending reality. My brain learned to live on what remained, which was roughly $2,100 a month after taxes, rent, and the automatic transfers. The Vanguard 2025 How America Saves report found that 401k participants who use automatic enrollment and automatic escalation reach savings rates nearly double those who manage contributions manually. Automation isn't a convenience. It's the mechanism. It removes the decision, and decisions are where most people fail. I tracked every dollar I spent in a notebook, not an app. A physical notebook. Every night before bed, I sat down for about 5 minutes and wrote down what I'd spent that day and which category it fell into. Needs, wants, bills. This sounds obsessive. It felt obsessive for the first 2 weeks. After that, it became automatic. The act of writing forced my brain to consciously process each purchase twice, once when I made it and once when I recorded it. By the end of the first month, I'd identified over $300 in spending I genuinely did not realize I was doing. Subscription charges I'd forgotten, vending machine purchases, a $4 sparkling water habit at the gas station that was costing me roughly $80 a month. People who track spending save 15 to 20% more than people who don't, according to multiple behavioral finance studies. The notebook cost me $3. It saved me thousands. I cooked almost every meal at home and batch cooked on Sundays. Sunday afternoons, I'd spend about 2 hours making 3 large meals: a big pot of chili or soup, a sheet pan of roasted chicken and vegetables, a batch of rice with whatever protein was on sale. These 3 meals covered roughly 12 to 14 of my weekly meals. The remaining meals were eggs, sandwiches, oatmeal, or leftovers from a slightly more ambitious weeknight dinner. My average monthly grocery bill was about $220. The average American spends roughly $350 to $400 on groceries per person, and another $300 to $400 on dining out and delivery. My total food cost was about half what most people my age spent. The savings were roughly $250 to $300 a month compared to my peers. That's $3,000 a year, redirected to investments. At 8% over 30 years, those Sunday cooking sessions are worth roughly $367,000. I kept my rent below 25% of my take-home pay. Every personal finance source says 30%. I aimed for 25. My take-home was about $2,850 after taxes and before my automated investments. 25% of that is roughly $712. I found the studio for $730, which was $18. Over my target, I took it because it was clean, safe, and close enough to work that my commute was short. My friends were paying $1,100 to $1,400 for nicer places in trendier neighborhoods. The monthly gap between my rent and the average rent my friend group paid was roughly $500. $500 a month. Invested at 8% over 20 years, that's roughly $295,000. My apartment didn't have granite countertops or in-unit laundry. It had a working stove and a door that locked. Those were the requirements. Everything else was a premium I refused to pay. I drove a used car I bought with cash and maintained religiously. The 2014 Civic cost me $8,200 from a private seller I found on Facebook Marketplace. I had it inspected by a mechanic before buying, which cost $75 and saved me from 2 other cars that had hidden problems. I changed the oil every 5,000 miles, rotated the tires twice a year, replaced the air filter when it needed it. The total annual maintenance cost averaged about $600. I had 0 car payment. The average new car payment hit $767 a month at the end of 2025, according to Experian. That means the average American is spending over $9,000 a year just on the payment alone, not including insurance, gas, and maintenance on a more expensive vehicle. My total annual car cost, including insurance, gas, and maintenance, was about $3,400. The typical new car owner's total cost easily exceeds $14,000. The difference of roughly $10,600 a year invested is worth approximately $1.29 million over 30 years at 8%. My car had a crack in the windshield and a faded dashboard. It also had 4 wheels and an engine that started every morning. That's all a car needs to do. I use the library for books, movies, and audiobooks instead of buying or subscribing. My local library gave me free access to thousands of books, DVDs, and through the Libby app, a massive catalog of audiobooks and ebooks I could listen to during my commute. I read roughly 2 books a month this way. The average reader who buys their books spends about $250 to $400 a year. I spent 0. Beyond the cost savings, the library habit changed my relationship with consumption in general. When you learn that you can access something without owning it, you start questioning the entire premise of ownership across other categories too. I made coffee at home 5 days a week and treated myself to 1 bought coffee on Fridays. The Friday coffee was my ritual. I looked forward to it all week. It costs $5.50 from a local shop. That's roughly $22 a month on coffee. The average daily coffee buyer spends $6 a day, 5 days a week, which is $1,560 a year. My annual coffee cost was about $290, including the beans I bought for home. The savings of roughly $1,270 a year isn't life-changing in isolation, but it's $1,270 that compounds. Over 20 years at 8%, it's about $62,000. From making coffee in a $12 French press every morning, I never paid for a gym membership. I ran outside, I did bodyweight exercises in my apartment using a free YouTube program. I bought a used pull-up bar from Craigslist for $15 and a jump rope for $8. My total fitness investment was $23. The average gym membership costs $40 to $60 a month. Most gym members use their membership 4 to 5 times a month, which means each visit costs $8 to $15. I worked out 5 to 6 days a week for free. The $60 a month I saved went directly to my Roth IRA. That's $720 a year. At 8% over 25 years, it's roughly $55,000. A pull-up bar, a jump rope, and a running path are worth $55,000 in future wealth. Nobody at the gym is running those numbers on the treadmill. I negotiated every recurring bill at least once a year. Car insurance, phone plan, internet. I called each provider, told them I was considering switching, and asked what they could offer to keep me. Consumer Reports found that 70% of people who do this get a reduction. I got reductions on all 3 in my first year. Combined annual savings, about $480. The calls took less than 30 minutes total. That's roughly $960 an hour in effective earnings, tax-free. No side hustle pays that well for that little effort. I used cash for all discretionary spending. Every 2 weeks, I withdrew $200 in cash. That was my entire budget for dining out, entertainment, personal items, and anything that wasn't a fixed bill. When the cash was gone, I was done until the next paycheck. No exceptions. This was brutally effective because physical money triggers the brain's pain of paying response in a way that swiping a card never does. Research consistently shows that people spend 12 to 18% less when using cash. The envelope was my governor. It didn't let me overspend because it physically couldn't. The discipline wasn't willpower. It was architecture. I bought almost everything secondhand. Furniture, kitchen supplies, clothes for casual wear. Electronics when possible. My entire apartment was furnished for under $900 through Goodwill, Facebook Marketplace, and a moving sale from a neighbor who was relocating. My coworker furnished a similar-sized apartment at West Elm and IKEA for about $6,300. Went straight to my brokerage account the month I moved in. One purchase, one decision, $5,400 immediately at work. I practiced the 24-hour rule on every purchase over $30. See something I want? Wait 1 day. If I still wanted it 24 hours later, I bought it. If I forgot about it, I didn't. This eliminated roughly 60 to 70% of my impulse purchases. Americans spend an average of $282 a month on impulse buys, according to Capital One shopping data. My impulse spending averaged about $40 to $60 a month. The difference is roughly $220 a month, or $2,640 a year. The 24-hour rule costs nothing. It requires no willpower in the moment because the decision is deferred, not denied. By the time the 24 hours pass, the emotional urgency has almost always evaporated. I unsubscribed from every marketing email the moment it arrived. Every promotional email is a trigger designed by a team of psychologists and data scientists to make you spend money you weren't planning to spend. I treated each one as an attack on my financial goals. Unsubscribe, delete. Gone. Within 3 months, my inbox was clean and my exposure to purchase triggers dropped by roughly 80%. You can't buy what you don't see. Removing the temptation is infinitely easier than resisting it. I deleted shopping apps from my phone. Amazon, Target, every retailer. If I needed something, I had to open my laptop, log in through a browser, and navigate to the site manually. That friction, those extra 30 seconds of effort, eliminated roughly 40% of my online purchases. The purchases I did make were intentional. They were planned. I never bought anything from a push notification again. But let me pause here because I want to address something I know is sitting in the back of some of your minds. This sounds extreme. It sounds like I spent 2 years as a hermit, eating rice and beans in a dark apartment while my friends lived their lives. That's not what happened. I went to dinner with friends. I just went once or twice a month instead of 4 times a week. And I chose the $14 entree instead of the $38 one. I traveled. I took a road trip to the Smoky Mountains that cost me $312 total, including gas, a campsite, and food. I had hobbies. I played basketball at the park. I cooked elaborate meals on weekends as a creative outlet. I read constantly. I hiked. I had a full, engaged, genuinely enjoyable life. The difference between my life and my peers' lives wasn't the quality of the experiences. It was the cost. I found the cheap version of every good thing and discovered that the cheap version was usually just as good, sometimes better, because it came without the financial anxiety that follows a $700 weekend you put on a credit card you can't pay off. I used my employer's 401k match completely from day one. My company matched 100% of the first 3% and 50% of the next 2%. On my $52,000 salary, contributing 5% meant I got an additional $2,600 a year from my employer. Free money. I was 22 years old, and my employer was handing me $2,600 annually that required nothing from me except checking a box and selecting a contribution percentage. 88% of 401k participants received an employer match in the fourth quarter of 2025, according to Fidelity. The ones who didn't contribute enough to capture the full match were declining compensation. I wasn't going to be one of them. I opened a Roth IRA in my first month of working and contributed monthly. In 2026, the annual Roth IRA limit is $7,500. I contributed roughly $625 a month, pulling from the automatic transfer I'd set up on payday. The money went into a low-cost total stock market index fund with an expense ratio of 0.03%. I didn't pick stocks. I didn't time the market. I didn't follow crypto influencers or meme stock forums. I bought the entire market every month, regardless of what the market was doing, and I let compound interest handle the rest. Dollar cost averaging into an index fund is the single most boring and most effective wealth building strategy available to an ordinary person. It requires no expertise, no timing, and no emotional intelligence. It requires a brokerage account and a monthly transfer. I kept my phone for 3.5 years instead of upgrading every cycle. I used a phone I bought refurbished for $260. It made calls. It sent texts. It ran every app I needed. It did not have the latest camera module or the newest chip that benchmark reviewers get excited about. Over 3.5 years, I saved roughly $4,000 to $7,000 compared to someone upgrading annually on a payment plan. The phone industry's entire business model depends on convincing you that last year's device is inadequate. It almost never is. My $260 phone did everything a $1,200 phone would have done. The only difference was bragging rights I didn't need and a camera zoom level I would have used 3 times. I said no to things I wanted but didn't need. This was the hardest habit, harder than cooking at home, harder than driving the old car, harder than living in the small apartment, because the things I said no to weren't bad decisions. They were genuinely appealing opportunities that I could technically afford. A trip to Austin with friends, a concert I really wanted to attend, a leather jacket I tried on at a store and stood in front of the mirror for 5 minutes, genuinely considering. Each time I ran the math, not just the sticker price, the shadow price, the compounding cost. The $280 concert ticket isn't $280 at 22. At 8% over 40 years, it's roughly $6,100. I'm not saying every concert is a bad decision. I'm saying I became very selective about which experiences were worth $6,000 of future wealth. Most of them weren't. The ones that were, I attended fully and without guilt, because I knew I'd evaluated the trade honestly. I used high-yield savings for my emergency fund instead of a regular account. This sounds minor. It isn't. High-yield savings accounts in 2026 are paying roughly 4 to 5% APY. The national average on a traditional savings account is 0.39%. On a $5,000 emergency fund, that's the difference between earning $200 and $19 a year. Same money, same liquidity, same protection. I just put it in a different container. Over the 2.5 years of this journey, the high-yield interest earned me roughly an extra $450 that a regular savings account would not have generated. Small amounts matter when they compound. I set a zero-based budget every single month. Every dollar had a job before the month started. Rent, $730, groceries, $220, gas, $70, insurance, $118, phone, $35, internet, $45, cash envelope, $200, investments, $1,500. Everything else was allocated down to zero. If there were leftover dollars, they went to investments. If an unexpected expense hit, I adjusted within the budget by pulling from another category. The budget wasn't a restriction. It was a map. Without it, money wanders. With it, money obeys. I found free entertainment as my default and treated paid entertainment as the exception. Parks, hiking trails, library events, friends' apartments for movie nights, pickup basketball, community concerts in the summer, free museum days. Podcast walks. The idea that fun requires spending money is one of the most expensive assumptions in American culture. It's false. The best evenings of my early 20s happened in living rooms with friends, homemade food, and a deck of cards. The worst evenings happened at overcrowded bars where I spent $80 to have conversations I couldn't hear. Once I started treating free entertainment as the default, paid entertainment became genuinely special instead of reflexive. I enjoyed a $30 dinner more when it happened once a month than I ever enjoyed it when it happened 3 times a week. I invested every windfall, tax refund, birthday money, the occasional freelance check from a skill I had. Every dollar that arrived outside of my regular paycheck went directly to my brokerage account. I didn't treat it as bonus money. I treated it as accelerant. My tax refund in my first full year of working was about $1,900. That went straight to investments. Birthday money from relatives totaled about $300 across a year. Straight to investments. A freelance project paid me $600. Behavioral economists call the tendency to categorize unexpected money differently from earned money mental accounting. A dollar from your tax refund spends exactly like a dollar from your paycheck. It compounds exactly the same way, too. The only difference is that you feel permission to spend one and guilt about spending the other. I eliminated the distinction. All money was investment fuel. Let me tell you where the $100,000 came from, broken down. Because I think the transparency matters. Over roughly 2.5 years of working, here's what the accumulation looked like. My 401k contributions plus employer match totaled approximately $31,000. My Roth IRA contributions totaled approximately $15,000. Additional brokerage investments from windfall money and extra savings totaled approximately $16,000. Market returns across all accounts during that period added roughly $12,000. My high-yield emergency fund and savings sat at roughly $7,000. Cash I'd accumulated from various sales and side income contributed about $4,000. The remaining balance came from the compounding of all contributions during the period. Total invested plus saved plus market returns equaled approximately $100,800 at age 24. 90% of that number came directly from the habits I just described. Not from a high salary, not from a lucky stock pick, not from timing the market. From cooking rice and beans on Sundays, from driving a car with a cracked windshield, from living in a studio apartment while my friends leased 2 bedrooms in the trendy part of town, from saying no to Austin, from making coffee in a French press, from tracking every dollar in a $3 notebook. These habits are not impressive individually. A few dollars here, a few dollars there. Nobody looks at a person packing their lunch and thinks they're building generational wealth. Nobody sees a refurbished phone and assumes the person holding it has a 6-figure investment account. Nobody drives past a 2014 Civic in a parking lot and thinks that person is going to be a millionaire. But that's exactly the point. Wealth is invisible. The person driving the leased BMW looks rich. The person in the Civic might actually be rich. The person ordering the $38 entree looks successful. The person who ordered the $14 pasta and invested the difference is building something the entree buyer will never understand until it's too late. Here's what $100,000 at 24 actually means. And this is the part that makes every boring habit on this list worth it. $100,000 at $24 invested in a total market index fund earning 10% average annual returns becomes roughly $3.4 million by 65. Without adding another cent, just from existing, just from compounding. The $100,000 was the seed. Time is the soil. The $3.4 million is the tree. But I didn't stop contributing at 24. Nobody does. If I continue investing even $500 a month from 24 to 65, at 10%, the additional contributions alone generate roughly $3.6 million. Combined with the original $100,000, my total portfolio at 65 is in the range of $7 million. $7 million. From rice and beans, a used Civic, a studio apartment, a $3 notebook, and 20 habits that nobody on Instagram would ever photograph. The average retirement savings for Americans in their 20s is a median of $42,502. According to Empower data, the average for Americans in their 60s is a median of $536,748. That median, 60-year-old has spent 40 years working and has about $500,000 to show for it. I had $100,000 at 24. The compounding curve doesn't care about your salary. It cares about when you started and how much you fed it. 20 boring habits fed it enough to change the math permanently. I want to be clear about something. These habits aren't for everyone in their exact form. You might not be able to live on $2,100 a month. You might have student loans that demand a larger portion of your income. You might live in a city where $730 doesn't rent a closet, let alone a studio. The specific numbers are mine. The principles are universal. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference automatically. Track everything, eliminate financial friction that works against you. Introduce friction that works for you. Say no to things that cost more in compounded future dollars than they're worth in present enjoyment. Say yes to the habits that feel small today and become enormous over time. The personal savings rate in America sits at about 4.4% as of early 2026, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. That means the average American keeps 4.5 cents of every after-tax dollar. I was keeping roughly 45 to 50% during those 2.5 years. The distance between 4% and 50% isn't a salary gap. It's a behavior gap. The behaviors are the 20 things I just listed. Not one of them required earning more money. They required spending less of it and redirecting the difference toward a brokerage account that did the actual wealth building while I slept. More than half of Americans can't cover an unexpected $1,000 expense without borrowing, according to Bankrate's 2025 Emergency Savings Report. I built a $7,000 emergency fund on a $52,000 salary while simultaneously investing $1,500 a month. The emergency fund wasn't extra. It was baked into the system. Habit number 20, the zero-based budget, made sure every dollar had a job. And one of those jobs was protecting me from the kind of financial shock that derails most people's wealth-building trajectory permanently. There's a moment I think about often. It was about 14 months into this journey. I was at a birthday dinner for a friend. Everyone was ordering cocktails and appetizers. I ordered water and the cheapest entree. My friend leaned over and said, half joking, half serious, "Are you okay? Do you need money?" She genuinely thought I was struggling. I had more invested at that moment than anyone at the table, possibly more than several of them combined. I didn't correct her. I didn't pull up my brokerage app and prove anything. I just smiled and said I was good, because the thing about building wealth quietly is that you don't need anyone to know. The account balance is the validation. The compounding curve is the applause. The 20 habits are the performance, and the audience is just you, checking the numbers once a quarter, watching the curve start to bend, knowing that every boring decision you made is stacking on top of every other boring decision. In a way that will produce results most people call lucky when they finally see them. They're not lucky. They're the predictable mathematical consequence of 20 small behaviors repeated daily for a very long time. This brings me to something I think about constantly. These 20 habits worked because I learned why they worked, not just what to do. Packing a lunch saves money. Everyone knows that. But understanding that the $12 daily difference between packed and purchased, invested at 8% for 40 years, is worth roughly $142,000. That understanding changes the behavior permanently. You don't need willpower to pack a lunch when you know the lunch is worth $142,000. The knowledge does the work that discipline can't sustain. That knowledge has a name: financial literacy. It's the understanding of compound interest that makes the automatic transfer feel urgent instead of optional. It's the understanding of opportunity cost that makes the BMW feel expensive instead of aspirational. It's the understanding of how money moves through a life over decades that transforms 20 small habits from a list of sacrifices into a wealth-building machine. Without financial literacy, these habits are chores. Things a YouTube video told you to do. Things you'll try for 3 weeks and abandon because they feel pointless when you can't see the curve yet. With financial literacy, they're inevitable. You do them because the math is so clear, so overwhelming, so obviously in your favor that not doing them would feel insane. I hit 100,000 at 24. The habits got me there. The literacy made the habits possible. Both were learned. Neither was inherited, and neither requires a salary above the one you already have. But Here's the thing I wish someone had told me at 22 before I started. The habits that build wealth in your 20s are specific to your 20s. The financial traps that threaten a 22-year-old are different from the ones that threaten a 34-year-old, which are different from the ones waiting at 45 and 57. Every decade of your financial life carries its own set of decisions that feel rational in the moment and cost you enormously over time. Lifestyle inflation after your first real raise, the car upgrade when you feel like you deserve it, the house purchase that stretches your budget because the bank said you qualified, the undersaving in your peak earning years because expenses for kids and mortgages consumed everything. Each age has a specific trap. Each trap has a specific cost. Knowing what those traps look like before you arrive at the age where they're waiting is the difference between a person who hits 100,000 at 24 and keeps building for the next 40 years, and a person who hits 100,000 at 24 and watches it evaporate by 35 because they walked into every trap their 30s had waiting for them. The 20 habits were the beginning. Knowing the map of what comes next is what keeps the curve bending. The number in my account at 24 wasn't the destination, it was the first mile of a very long road. The road has turns, it has traps, it has off-ramps that look appealing and lead nowhere. The people who stay on the road are the ones who can see the turns coming before they arrive. I couldn't see them at 22. I can see them now. That's the only difference that ever mattered. Every habit I just covered comes from American financial research and data, millionaire behavior studies, consumer spending reports, compound interest math. But here's something I discovered that changed my perspective completely. Some of the most powerful wealth-building habits didn't originate in America at all. They come from a culture that has practiced financial discipline for centuries in ways most Americans have never been exposed to. Japanese money culture approaches wealth from a completely different starting point. Where American finance focuses on earning more, Japanese financial philosophy focuses on needing less. Where we optimize for income, they optimize for intention. These habits don't require more money. They require a different relationship with the money you already have. 2 years ago, I was sitting at my kitchen table staring at a pile of stuff I'd just bought from Target. Candles I didn't need, a throw pillow to replace a throw pillow that was perfectly fine, a kitchen gadget still in the box from the last kitchen gadget I bought and never opened. My credit card statement showed $4,100 in charges that month. My savings account showed $812. I made $63,000 a year. I had been making over $50,000 for 6 years. I had essentially nothing to show for it. That same week, I read an article about a Japanese woman named Fumiko Chiba, who wrote a book about a century-old budgeting system called kakeibo. What caught my attention wasn't the system itself. It was a detail buried in the article. Chiba mentioned that many Japanese households she studied had been using some version of these financial habits for generations. Grandmothers passing them to mothers, mothers passing them to daughters. Families building wealth quietly across decades using principles so simple they felt almost insulting compared to the complicated financial advice I'd been consuming on YouTube and Instagram for years. But here's what really hit me. Japan's cultural relationship with money is almost the mirror opposite of America's. In the US, we celebrate spending. New car, new house, new wardrobe, congratulations. Wealth is performed. It's visible. It's posted. In Japan, wealth is hidden. It's considered tasteless to display it. Financial restraint isn't a sacrifice, it's a value. There's even a word for it, tsutsumashi. It roughly means modestly reserved, and it carries deep social respect. The quieter you live, the more admired you are. In America, the quieter you live, the more people assume you're struggling. I started applying these Japanese money principles to my own life, one at a time over the following year. I didn't change my income. I didn't start a side hustle. I didn't cancel every subscription or stop eating out entirely. I just changed the philosophy underneath my spending. In 12 months, I went from $812 in savings to over $19,000. Same job, same salary, same apartment, different operating system. This video is about that operating system. 10 Japanese money habits that build quiet, lasting wealth and that most Americans have never heard of. Every single one of these is applicable to your financial life in the US right now in 2026, regardless of what you earn. Some will feel immediately practical. Others will challenge how you think about money at a level that goes much deeper than budgets and spreadsheets. Let's get into it. Kakeibo, the handwritten household ledger. This is the foundation, and it's over 120 years old. Kakeibo was invented in 1904 by Hani Motoko, Japan's first female journalist, at a time when women in Japan had almost no financial autonomy. She designed it as a tool for housewives to take control of family spending using nothing but a notebook and a pen. The idea is brutally simple. At the beginning of each month, you write down 4 things by hand: how much money is coming in, how much you need for fixed expenses, how much you want to save, how much you have left to spend. Then, every single day, you write down what you spent and sort each purchase into one of 4 categories: needs, wants, culture, which includes education, books, and experiences, unexpected expenses. At the end of the month, you review everything and ask yourself 3 questions. How much did I save? What went well? What can I improve next month? That's it. That's the entire system. It sounds almost too simple to work, and that's exactly why it does. Here's what makes Kakeibo different from every budgeting app on your phone. The physical act of writing forces your brain to process each purchase consciously. When you tap a card and a number flashes on a screen, your brain barely registers it. When you sit down at night and write DoorDash, $42, wants, your hand is telling your brain something your app never could. You chose to spend $42 on food delivery. That was a want, not a need, not culture, a want. Practitioners claim kakeibo can reduce unnecessary spending by up to 35%. I didn't hit 35% in my first month, but I hit about 22%, which on my income at the time was roughly $1,150 saved in a single month from a notebook that cost $3. The reason this matters in the US specifically is that 47% of Americans entered 2026 without any budget at all, according to YouGov data. Among those who do budget, most use apps that automate the process, which means they never develop the conscious spending awareness that kakeibo builds. The app does the work. Your brain stays asleep. Kakeibo forces your brain to wake up, and once it's awake, it doesn't go back to sleep easily. There's something else about kakeibo that deserves attention because it explains why the system has survived for over a century while every budgeting app cycles through popularity and abandonment within 2 to 3 years. Kakeibo uses 4 spending categories instead of the 15 or 20 that most modern apps use: needs, wants, culture, unexpected. That's it. The simplicity isn't a limitation, it's the design. Because the moment you sort a purchase into one of those 4 buckets, you're making a judgment call that no algorithm can make for you. Is this restaurant meal a need or a want? Is this online course culture or a want dressed up in self-improvement clothing? Is this Target run a need, or did you walk in for paper towels and walk out with $73 of things that happened to catch your eye? Those questions create what behavioral psychologists call cognitive friction. Friction slows you down. Slowness creates awareness. Awareness changes behavior. American financial culture is obsessed with reducing friction. Tap to pay, one-click purchase, auto-pay everything. Frictionless sounds efficient. In reality, frictionless spending is why the average American underestimates their subscription costs by $133 a month and their impulse spending by nearly $300. Kakeibo deliberately reintroduces friction into your spending life. The friction is the feature. My friend Danielle tried kakeibo for 6 weeks after years of using budgeting apps that she'd download, configure, and abandon within a month. She told me the difference was that the apps made her feel like a passive observer of her own spending. The data was there, but she never processed it. Writing it down by hand forced her to process every purchase twice, once when she made it and once when she recorded it. By week 3, she'd started pausing before purchases and mentally categorizing them before she reached for her wallet. Do I want to write this down tonight? Became her filter. If the answer was no, she didn't buy it. Her discretionary spending dropped by $400 in the first month. Mottainai, the deep shame of waste. This is a concept that has no direct English translation, and that's part of why most Americans have never encountered it. Mottainai is a feeling. It's the emotional response of regret and discomfort that arises when something useful is wasted, discarded, or undervalued. In Japanese culture, wasting a resource, whether it's food, fabric, money, or even time, is considered almost morally wrong. When someone throws away food that could have been eaten or replaces an appliance that could have been repaired, the response isn't, "That's their choice." The response is mottainai, which carries the weight of, "What a waste. That's a shame." Contrast this with America, where waste is structurally embedded in the consumer economy. The USDA estimates that American households waste roughly 30% of the food they buy. That's approximately $2,100 per household per year thrown directly in the garbage. Americans discard roughly 82 pounds of textiles per person per year, according to the EPA. We replace smartphones every 2 to 3 years, when devices are engineered to last 4. We throw away furniture when we move, instead of taking it with us. When I started practicing mottainai, the first thing I did was track food waste. For 1 week, I photographed everything I threw away from my fridge and pantry. The amount was genuinely shocking. Half a bag of spinach, leftover rice I forgot about, expired yogurt, a quarter of a rotisserie chicken. I was throwing away roughly $40 of food per week. That's over $2,000 a year from my refrigerator. I started meal planning around what I already had instead of what sounded good. I started freezing leftovers the same day instead of telling myself I'd eat them tomorrow. I started buying smaller quantities more often instead of bulk buying things that go bad before I can finish them. Within 3 months, my grocery spending dropped by almost 30%. Not because I was eating less, because I was wasting less. Mottainai extends far beyond food. It changes how you relate to everything you own. You repair instead of replace. You use something completely before buying the next version. You find a second purpose for items before discarding them. In Japan, there's a tradition called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold-lacquered adhesive instead of being thrown away. The repair becomes part of the object's beauty. The crack doesn't diminish its value. It adds to it. Apply that philosophy to your financial life. The thing that's slightly worn, slightly outdated, slightly imperfect, still works, still serves you, still has value. Mottainai teaches you to see that value instead of reaching for the replacement. Hara hachibu, eat until you are 80% full. This principle comes from Confucian teaching and is practiced widely in Okinawa, Japan, which has one of the highest concentrations of centenarians in the world. The idea is simple. Stop eating when you feel about 80% satisfied, rather than eating until you're completely full. Most Americans eat until discomfort. We pile plates, we supersize, we order appetizers, entrees, and desserts, and feel compelled to finish everything because we paid for it. The financial implications of hara hachibu are enormous when you translate it beyond food into a general philosophy of enough. It means you don't fill your life to 100% capacity. You leave room. Room in your stomach, room in your closet, room in your budget, room in your schedule. That remaining 20% isn't deprivation, it's margin. And margin is where wealth lives. In practical terms, applying hara hachibu to spending means leaving roughly 20% of your income untouched. If you earn $4,200 a month after taxes, you live as though you earn $3,360. That $840 goes to savings and investments automatically. You don't touch it because it doesn't exist in your spending reality. The Bureau of Economic Analysis reported that the U.S. personal savings rate sat at about 4% as of early 2026. 4%. The Japanese cultural default through practices like harahachibu targets 20%. That 16-point gap between 4% and 20% is the difference between retiring anxious and retiring comfortable. On a $60,000 salary, it's the difference between saving $2,400 a year and saving $12,000. Over 30 years at 8% returns, that gap becomes the difference between roughly $293,000 and $1.47 million. There's a deeper layer to harahachibu that goes beyond the savings rate math. In Okinawa, where the practice originates, it's not taught as a diet hack or financial strategy. It's taught as a form of respect. Respect for the food, because you don't waste it by overconsumption. Respect for your body, because you don't burden it unnecessarily. Respect for the future, because you leave resources available for tomorrow instead of consuming everything today. That word, respect, is what's missing from American financial culture. We don't respect our future selves. We sacrifice tomorrow's wealth for today's comfort with alarming consistency. The average American carries about $6,500 in credit card debt at 22.4% APR. That debt is borrowed comfort. It's the financial equivalent of eating until you're 120% full and wondering why you feel sick. Harahachibu applied to money isn't just a saving strategy. It's a form of self-respect. It's telling your future self, I left something for you. I didn't consume it all. This is not financial advice, but I want you to consider what your life would look like if you treated 80% as your ceiling instead of your floor. 80% of your income spent, 80% of your closet filled, 80% of your weekends scheduled. That remaining 20% isn't empty space. It's breathing room. It's margin. It's the space where financial resilience lives, where opportunities can be seized without going into debt, where an emergency remains an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. A woman named Carla, who works in hospital administration in Dallas, started applying harahachibu to her finances 18 months ago. She calculated 80% of her take-home pay, which was about $3,600 out of $4,500, and committed to living within that boundary. The remaining $900 went to a high-yield savings account, earning around 4%, and a Roth IRA. In 18 months, Carla saved and invested over $16,000. She told me the hardest part wasn't the spending reduction. It was rewiring her brain to see 80% as abundant rather than restrictive. Once that shifted, everything else followed naturally. Kaizen, continuous small improvement. Most Americans know this word from the manufacturing world. Toyota made it famous as a production philosophy. But in Japanese daily life, Kaizen applies to everything, including finances. The principle is that you don't try to overhaul your life in one dramatic move. You improve by 1% repeatedly over a very long period of time. Applied to money, Kaizen looks like this. This month, you reduce your dining out spending by 10%. Not 50, 10. Next month, you increase your retirement contribution by 1%. The month after, you cancel one subscription. Then you negotiate one bill. Then you switch one brand name product to generic. Each change is so small, it feels insignificant. Each change is so easy, it requires almost no willpower. But 12 months of Kaizen produces a completely different financial life than the one you started with, and you barely felt the transition. The reason Kaizen works better than dramatic financial overhauls is neuroscience. Your brain's amygdala, the fear center, activates when you attempt large changes. It perceives big shifts as threats. That's why most people who radically slash their budget in January abandon it by March. The change was too large, the amygdala resisted, and willpower eventually lost the war. Kaizen flies under the amygdala's radar. 1% improvements don't trigger resistance. They accumulate unnoticed until one day you look up and realize your savings rate went from 4% to 18% over the course of a year, and you genuinely cannot pinpoint the moment it happened. Ikigai, your reason for being, applied to money. Ikigai is a concept that roughly translates to reason for living. In the West, it's been popularized as a career-finding framework, the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. But in Japan, Ikigai isn't about career optimization. It's about having a purpose that gives structure and meaning to your daily life. That purpose can be gardening, cooking for your family, teaching, volunteering, maintaining your health into old age. When you apply Ikigai to money, it transforms your financial life in a way no spreadsheet ever could, because it answers the question that budgets and apps and investment calculators never ask. What is the money for? Most Americans accumulate money without purpose or spend money without intention. They save because they're supposed to, or they spend because something looked appealing. There's no guiding philosophy underneath the behavior. Ikigai gives you that philosophy. When you know what your money is for, when you've identified the specific life you're building, every spending decision becomes a vote for or against that life. My friend Terrence defined his Ikigai as being present for his daughter's childhood without financial stress. Once he had that clarity, every unnecessary purchase became an obstacle to his reason for being. He didn't need willpower to stop impulse buying. He needed purpose. The impulse purchases didn't just feel expensive after he found his Ikigai. They felt irrelevant. Wabi-sabi. Finding beauty in imperfection. This is one of the most profound Japanese aesthetic and philosophical concepts, and it's the direct antidote to the consumer culture that dominates American spending. Wabi-sabi is the appreciation of things that are imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. A cracked bowl that still holds soup. A wooden table with scratches that tell the story of 100 family dinners. A sweater with a small mend that reminds you how long you've loved it. In America, imperfection is a reason to replace. Scratch on your phone screen? New phone. Scuff on your shoes? New shoes. Couch cushions slightly flattened? Time to browse West Elm. The consumer economy depends on your dissatisfaction with things that still work. Wabi-sabi invites you to find satisfaction in them instead. The financial impact of this mindset shift is staggering when you calculate it over time. Americans spend roughly $9,500 a year on the categories most driven by aesthetic dissatisfaction: apparel, home furnishings, and consumer electronics. If Wabi-sabi reduced that spending by even 25% by helping you keep things longer, repair instead of replace, and appreciate what you already own, that's $2,375 a year redirected. At 8% over 25 years, that's roughly $183,000 built from a philosophy of finding beauty in what you already have. Osoji, the annual deep clean and financial reset. In Japan, Osoji is a tradition performed at the end of each year. Families thoroughly clean their entire home, discard what no longer serves them, and enter the new year with physical and mental clarity. It's not spring cleaning. It's more intentional than that. It's a ritual of letting go. Applied to finances, Osoji becomes an annual financial reset. Once a year, ideally in December or January, you sit down and conduct a complete audit of your financial life. Every subscription, every recurring charge, every insurance policy, every investment allocation, every debt balance, every auto pay. You review it all, cancel what isn't serving you, renegotiate what can be lowered, and realign everything with your current goals. Most people set up financial systems and then never revisit them. Subscriptions pile up, insurance premiums creep, investment allocations drift away from targets, and annual osoji catches all of it. In my first financial osoji, I found $318 a month in charges I'd completely forgotten about or no longer needed. That's $3,816 a year that was quietly draining from my account while I wasn't looking. Chokin, the habit of saving first. Chokin literally means savings, but in Japanese financial culture, it represents a specific habit. You save before you spend. Not whatever's left over at the end of the month. The first thing that happens when money enters your account is that a portion of it leaves, immediately, into a savings or investment vehicle. The spending happens with whatever remains. This is the opposite of how most Americans operate. The typical American pattern is earn, spend, and hope something is left to save. The Japanese chokin model is earn, save, then spend what remains. The difference sounds semantic. It's not. It's structural. When saving comes first, your spending naturally contracts to fit the remaining amount. When saving comes last, there's never anything remaining because expenses expand to fill whatever is available. Parkinson's law applies to money exactly the way it applies to time. Work expands to fill the time available. Spending expands to fill the income available. Chokin breaks this law by reducing the available income before spending begins. In the U.S., the equivalent of chokin is automating your savings and investment transfers to execute the day after your paycheck deposits. The Vanguard 2025 How America Saves report found that the average 401k contribution rate hit 7.7% in 2024, with automatic enrollment and auto-escalation features being the primary drivers. The people saving the most aren't more disciplined, they're more automated. They implemented chokin without knowing the word for it. Let me show you what chokin looks like in real American dollars with a specific example, because the math is what makes this habit undeniable. Marcus earns $4,800 a month after taxes. Under the typical American model, he spends throughout the month and saves whatever is left. In practice, nothing is ever left. His spending expands to fill his income, like gas filling a room. His savings rate hovers around 3%, roughly $144 a month, and that's only because his 401k takes a small percentage before he sees his paycheck. Now imagine Marcus implements chokin. On the morning after payday, an automatic transfer moves $960, 20%, into a combination of his 401k, a Roth IRA, and a high-yield savings account. He never sees that money. His spending reality becomes $3,840. He adjusts within about 2 months because the human brain is remarkably adaptable when the option to spend doesn't exist. After a year, Marcus has saved and invested $11,520. His previous approach would have produced roughly $1,728. Over 20 years at 8% average returns, Marcus's chokin habit produces approximately $570,000. His old habit produces roughly $100,000. Same salary, same city, same life. The only variable is the order of operations. Save, then spend, versus spend, then hope. Japanese households have practiced this ordering for generations. Credit card debt is nearly non-existent in Japan, partly because of this habit. The vast majority of Japanese credit cards are set to auto-pay the full balance every month by default. Carrying a revolving balance is culturally unusual. In the U.S., nearly half of credit card holders carry a balance month to month, and total credit card debt crossed $1.28 trillion at the end of 2025, according to the New York Federal Reserve. The structural difference isn't income. Japan's median household income is lower than America's. The difference is sequence. Save first, spend second. That's chokin. That's the habit. Shinrin-yoku and free living. In Japan, Shinrin-yoku means forest bathing. It's the practice of spending quiet, contemplative time in nature as a form of stress reduction and mental restoration. It costs nothing. The broader principle it represents is something I've come to think of as free living, the deliberate choice to build your leisure, social life, and recreation around activities that don't cost money. In the U.S., leisure is almost synonymous with spending. Fun costs money. Relaxation costs money. Socializing costs money. A night out, a weekend trip, a movie, a concert, a shopping excursion framed as entertainment. The average American household spends roughly $3,000 a year on entertainment, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Japanese culture offers a fundamentally different model: walking, cooking together, reading, gardening, park visits, temple visits, tea ceremonies performed at home. The richest moments of daily life happen without a transaction. When I started building my weekends around activities that cost nothing, parks, cooking with friends at home, library visits, long walks, my entertainment spending dropped by over 60% in 3 months. I didn't miss anything. The quality of my weekends actually improved because I stopped equating fun with consumption and started equating it with presence. Hansei, honest self-reflection. This is the last habit, and it's the one that holds all the others together. Hansei is a Japanese practice of sincere, rigorous self-reflection. It's not self-criticism. It's not guilt. It's an honest examination of what you did, what went well, what didn't, and what you'll do differently. In Japanese schools, children practice Hansei from a very young age. It's embedded in the culture. You don't reflect because you failed. You reflect because reflecting is how you grow. Applied to finances, Hansei is the monthly review that closes the kakeibo loop. You sit down with your notebook, look at what you spent, look at what you saved, and ask yourself 3 questions without judgment. Did I meet my savings goal? What purchases brought me genuine value? What would I do differently? This habit, this 10-minute monthly practice of honest financial reflection, is the most important habit on this list because it's the mechanism by which all the other habits improve. Mottainai gets sharper because you notice the waste. Harahachibu gets easier because you see where you overfilled. Kaizen gets direction because you identify the next 1% improvement. Without Hansei, the other 9 habits are static. With it, they compound. And that word, compound, is where I want to leave you. Everything I've described in this video, every one of these 10 habits, operates on the same principle that compound interest does. Small, consistent inputs, repeated over time, producing results that are wildly disproportionate to the effort. A $3 notebook and 10 minutes a day of kakeibo doesn't sound like a wealth-building strategy. Neither does leaving 20% of your plate empty or finding beauty in a scratched table. But these tiny behaviors, stacked on top of each other, practiced day after day, month after month, year after year, produce something that no income level can produce on its own. They produce a relationship with money that's grounded, intentional, and sustainable. The wealthiest people I've studied, and I don't mean the flashiest or the highest earning, I mean the ones with the deepest financial security and the least financial anxiety, share one trait. They understand how money works at a fundamental level. They understand compound interest. They understand the difference between an asset and a liability. They understand that $1 saved is worth more than $1 earned because it arrives without tax, without effort, and without burnout. That understanding has a name: financial literacy. It's the soil that every one of these Japanese habits grows in. Without it, kakeibo is just a notebook. Mottainai is just a word. Choking is just a concept you heard about in a YouTube video and forgot by next week. With financial literacy, these habits become a system, a quiet, boring, profoundly effective system that builds wealth the same way a Japanese garden grows. Slowly, intentionally, with every element placed for a reason. Nothing wasted, nothing rushed, nothing performed for an audience. The woman I was 2 years ago, sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by things she didn't need, bought with money she didn't have, carrying a credit card balance that made her stomach hurt every time she opened the app, that woman didn't need more income. She needed a different philosophy. She needed to learn that wealth isn't built by earning more, it's built by understanding more. The habits came after the understanding. The results came after the habits. Japan figured this out a long time ago. The principles are over a century old in some cases. They survived world wars, economic collapses, natural disasters, and cultural transformations because they work. They work because they're built on something deeper than tactics. They're built on respect for money as a resource, respect for yourself as the steward of that resource, and the quiet discipline to protect both. You don't need a bigger paycheck to start building wealth. You might already earn enough. You just need a notebook, a pen, and the willingness to pay attention to where your money actually goes. That's where it starts. That's where it always starts. Those 10 habits only scratch the surface. Japanese financial culture runs so deep that a single video couldn't cover it. What comes next are 12 more principles that go even further. Some of these are habits I've personally adopted since researching this topic. A few of them are concepts that don't even have direct English translations because American culture never developed the framework to describe them. If the first 10 surprised you, these will challenge how you think about money at an even deeper level. In early 2026, the average American household owes $105,000 in debt. The personal savings rate sits at 4.4%. According to Ramsey Solutions and Bankrate, 51% of Americans report living paycheck to paycheck, including a meaningful share of households earning over $500,000 a year. 27% of U.S. adults have zero emergency savings, the highest level ever recorded by Bankrate. By every headline metric, this is a financial system under stress. Now look across the Pacific. Japan's household saving rate is actually lower than America's, sitting at 3.9% in the fourth quarter of 2025, according to the Cabinet Office of Japan. Wages in Japan have stagnated for almost 3 decades. Interest rates have hovered near zero since 1999. On paper, Japanese households should be in worse shape than American ones. But Japanese families quietly hold trillions of dollars in long-term financial assets, with multi-generational businesses planning across centuries instead of quarters. Cultural restraint, post-war frugality, and Zen-influenced minimalism still shape daily money decisions in Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto in ways the average American household would barely recognize. The averages get skewed by a small minority of high-asset households, but the structural difference in behavior is real, measurable, and has been documented across decades of economic research. What nobody admits is that the gap between the two countries is not income. The gap is structure. The gap is 12 specific behaviors that have nothing to do with earning more, working harder, or chasing the next hot investment. This video is not going to teach the basic kakeibo notebook concept that has already been covered to death across personal finance content. The basics are a starting point, not the destination. This video covers 12 specific applications that take the underlying philosophy and translate it directly into 2026 American financial life, with American dollar amounts, American spending categories, and American economic conditions. The boring ones work the best. That's not an accident. These principles trace back to a Japan rebuilt from post-war rubble, shaped by Zen-influenced restraint and a culture that treats financial discipline as a quiet form of dignity. None of them require Japanese citizenship to use. They require structure, repetition, and a willingness to feel slightly out of step with American spending culture for the next 10 to 20 years. By the end, you will have a complete framework that costs nothing to implement, requires no special apps or software, and works in any economic condition. The rest is just willingness. Number 1, the kakeibo 4-question audit used before the purchase. Most American budgeting apps tell you what you spent after the money is gone. Kakeibo's actual mechanism is the opposite. Before any non-essential purchase, the user pauses and writes down the answers to 4 questions. How much money do I have right now? How much do I want to save by the end of the month? How much am I about to spend? And on what? How will this make my life genuinely better? Research published by Money Under 30 and Big Think found that consistent users of the kakeibo method report savings of up to 35% on monthly discretionary spending. The mechanism is not complicated. The act of writing the answers down on physical paper, even for 30 seconds, creates psychological friction that a one-tap checkout button cannot replicate. Studies on handwriting and decision-making show that the slower neural processing required to physically write something engages working memory in ways typing simply does not. Apply this to a 2026 American context. Imagine pausing before a $140 Amazon order at 11 at night. Imagine writing down the balance in your high-yield savings account, the goal you set in January, and the actual reason you are buying the item. Imagine doing this with a pen and a kitchen counter. The order gets smaller. Sometimes it disappears entirely. A reader named Kristen, profiled in coverage of kakeibo practitioners, discovered she had been spending nearly $300 per month on convenience store purchases she could not even remember making. Within 3 months of the 4-question audit, that category dropped to under $50. The money did not feel missed because it was never enjoyed in the first place. This habit is not about denial. It is about closing the gap between impulse and decision. That gap is where wealth quietly accumulates. But this next habit is the one that quietly determines whether your budget actually survives the year. Number 2, hara hachi bu spending, the 80% rule. In Okinawa, the longest living region of Japan, families practice a principle called hara hachi bu. The rough translation is eat until 80% full. Centenarians in places like Naha attribute much of their longevity to this single rule. They never finish a meal feeling stuffed. They stop while still slightly hungry. The body adjusts within a few weeks, and the surplus calories that would have caused chronic disease never get consumed. Apply this concept to a budget instead of a plate. The vast majority of American budgets are designed to spend exactly 100% of the available money. Rent, utilities, groceries, transportations, and discretionary categories together consume almost every dollar of after-tax income. There is no margin. One unexpected medical bill or car repair triggers credit card debt. The harahachi-bu version of budgeting deliberately stops at 80%. If your post-tax income is $6,000 per month, your entire spending plan, including all discretionary categories, is built around $4,800. The remaining $1,200 is invisible. It moves to savings, brokerage, or sinking funds the moment the paycheck arrives. This is not the same as saving 20%. The distinction matters. Saving 20% means trying to set money aside after spending. Harahachibu spending means the spending plan itself only covers 80% of available income. So the other 20% never enters the spending decision in the first place. The behavioral difference is everything. This habit is admittedly uncomfortable. It feels like you cannot afford the lifestyle you actually earn. That discomfort is the signal that it is working. According to Goldman Sachs research cited in 2025, more than 40% of Americans earning over $300,000 still report living paycheck to paycheck. 40% of those earning over $500,000 say the same. Those households are running their budgets at 100% capacity. Lifestyle has expanded to perfectly match income at every step. The 80% rule is the structural fix that prevents this trap regardless of income level. Number 3, motenai, the principle of waste being shameful. The Japanese word motenai carries a meaning that does not fully translate into English. It expresses a deep cultural sense that waste of food, of materials, of opportunity is morally uncomfortable. A grandmother in Kyoto using vegetable scraps for the next morning's miso broth is not being frugal. She is acting on a value system inherited across generations. The Japanese tradition of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer, is the same principle made visible. The repair becomes part of the object's story. The flaw becomes more valuable than the original perfection. In a 2026 American context, motenai shows up as a single decision: repair before you replace. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics data, the average American household spends approximately $1,800 per year on clothing, much of it discarded after just a few wears. Fast fashion has compressed the lifespan of an item from years to months. Phones get replaced on 24-month cycles. Furniture gets thrown away when a single leg breaks. Appliances get scrapped instead of serviced. The average American family of 4 also throws away approximately $1,500 in food each year, a perfect example of the same motenai violation extended into the kitchen. The motenai approach treats every owned object as a long-term asset. A pair of leather boots gets resold 3 times instead of replaced. A washing machine gets a $120 repair instead of a $1,500 replacement. A laptop battery gets swapped for $60 instead of triggering a new device purchase. A torn winter coat gets a $30 tailor visit instead of a $400 new one. A scratched dining table gets refinished instead of curbed. The math is unforgiving. Repairing items at 30 to 40% of replacement cost across a decade saves the average household between $15,000 and $25,000. That number, invested at conservative market returns from age 35 to age 65, becomes well over $100,000. The visible cost is the repair receipt. The invisible cost is everything that would have been thrown away. That number is the kind of number that makes accountants quietly nod. Number 4. Gaman, the practice of restraint. Gaman is one of the most respected concepts in Japanese culture. It translates roughly to perseverance with patience. A worker who endures a difficult assignment without complaint demonstrates gaman. A family that waits 10 years to upgrade their home demonstrates gaman. The cultural value placed on restraint is the opposite of the American expression treat yourself. In Japan, the ability to want something and not act on it is considered a sign of maturity, not deprivation. The financial application is simple and brutal. For any non-essential purchase over $200, impose a 30-day waiting period. No exceptions. Add the item to a list with the date. Revisit at the end of the month. According to behavioral research summarized across multiple consumer studies, the vast majority of impulse purchase desires fade within the first 2 weeks. The brain that wanted the item on day 1 frequently does not recognize the same impulse on day 21. The 30-day list becomes a graveyard of cravings that quietly died on their own. The same neural reward circuit that lights up at the moment of purchase desire goes dark within days, when the action is delayed. This decision seems small at the time. It is not. A household practicing this single rule across a year typically eliminates 15 to 20 discretionary purchases worth $200 or more. That is $3,000 to $4,000 annually that never leaves the account. Across 30 years of working life, invested in a low-cost index fund, that habit alone produces a 6-figure outcome. The boring math of restraint, compounding silently, beats almost any active strategy attempted by the same person. The companion benefit is rarely discussed. The items that survive the 30-day list are the items the household actually uses. Closets stop filling with regret purchases. Garages stop filling with hobby equipment that gets used twice. Kitchens stop filling with single-purpose gadgets that gather dust. The space stays clear because the wrong purchases never happen in the first place. Number 5. Hansei, the monthly reflection ritual. Hansei is the Japanese practice of structured self-reflection. Toyota uses it after every project, including successful ones, to identify what could have been done better. The practice is built on a counterintuitive idea. Reflection on success matters more than reflection on failure, because successful patterns often disguise hidden weaknesses. A month where the budget worked perfectly might still contain $300 in autopilot spending that nobody noticed, because the top-line numbers looked fine. Apply Hansei to personal finance. The first Sunday of every month, sit down with the previous month's bank and credit card statements. Categorize every charge. Look at the categories that came in under budget. Look at the ones that went over. Most importantly, look at the categories that hit budget exactly. That precision is often a sign of unconscious lifestyle creep, not discipline. A grocery budget that hits $400 every single month to the dollar often means the household is rounding up to the budget rather than spending what is actually needed. Ask 3 questions. What did I spend money on that produced no memorable benefit? What did I spend money on that produced disproportionate value? What recurring charge can be eliminated, reduced, or renegotiated before next month? Add a 4th question for completeness. Where did I spend money out of stress, boredom, or social pressure rather than genuine want? The honest answer to that question typically points to between 1 and 3 categories that quietly absorb hundreds of dollars per month. The Federal Reserve's 2024 Survey of Household Economics and Decision-Making found that 37% of American adults still cannot cover a $400 emergency without borrowing or selling something. That number has not improved meaningfully across multiple survey cycles. The Hansei practice exists to break that pattern. Without monthly reflection, spending defaults to autopilot, and autopilot defaults to consuming everything available. Hansei takes between 20 and 40 minutes once a month. The compounding return on that time investment is difficult to measure precisely, but it is the closest thing to a guaranteed financial improvement the average household can implement. Number 6, Shu-Ha-Ri, the path to investing mastery, originally from martial arts and the tea ceremony. It describes 3 stages. Shu, follow the rules exactly. Ha, break the rules with understanding. Ri, transcend the rules entirely. A student who tries to skip the first stage and innovate immediately creates expensive mistakes. The phrase is sometimes attributed to Sen no Rikyu, the 16th century tea master, and the principle has shaped Japanese craft traditions for almost 500 years. American retail investing in 2026 is a graveyard of skipped first stages. Beginners who have never owned a single index fund jump directly into options trading. New investors who do not understand expense ratios chase leveraged ETFs and cryptocurrency tokens. The 2024 Bankrate data on emergency savings shows that the same households reporting they cannot cover a $1,000 emergency are also the most likely to be holding speculative positions. The pattern is consistent. The skipped first stage produces the predictable later failure. The Shu-Ha-Ri investing path looks unglamorous from the outside. Shu means selecting one broad market index fund, contributing automatically every paycheck for at least 3 years, and learning nothing else during that period. No reallocations, no reading market commentary, just the quiet repetition of contribution and growth. The S&P 500 index has produced average annual returns of roughly 10% over the long term. The household that spends 3 years simply contributing without interfering will outperform the vast majority of active retail investors who spend the same period optimizing. Ha begins only after the first stage is mastered. Maybe a second fund gets added for international exposure. Maybe a small allocation gets moved to bonds as the time horizon shortens. Each change is studied and slow. The decisions are made from a position of demonstrated competence rather than a position of guesswork. Ri is the stage where most American retail investors start, and that is precisely why they fail. The Japanese pension system and the average Japanese retail investor share a preference for slow, dividend-yielding, low-volatility positions held for decades. The boring approach to investing is the boring approach for a reason. It works. If you took only one habit from this video and applied it for the next 30 years, this would be the one with the largest financial impact. But the next several are the ones that protect the conditions that allow this one to work. Number 7, the Tanimoshi Accountability Circle, modernized. In rural Japan, and especially in older Okinawan communities, families participated in Tanimoshi, a rotating savings group. A small group of trusted neighbors each contributed a fixed amount monthly. Each round, one member took the entire pot, with the rotation continuing until everyone had received a turn. The system was not about earning interest. It was about social accountability. The shame of failing to contribute in a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone else was more effective than any contractual penalty. The 2026 American version does not require pooling money. The mechanism is the accountability itself. 3 or 4 trusted friends agree to share a private monthly spreadsheet: net worth, savings rate, debt balance, and one financial decision they are wrestling with. The numbers are real. The conversation is structured. The shame of skipping a month is more effective than any budgeting app. According to research from Charles Schwab's 2026 Modern Wealth Survey, Americans now define wealthy as having $2.3 million in net worth and financially comfortable at $839,000. Those numbers are the result of social comparison, much of it driven by curated social media feeds. Goldman Sachs explicitly cited keeping up with the Joneses as a driver of paycheck to paycheck living among high earners in its 2025 report. The Tanimoshi Pact replaces unhealthy comparison with structured truth. The friends in the circle become a private benchmark that actually reflects reality instead of an Instagram feed showing everyone's highlight reel. The structure of the conversation matters. Each person reports the same 5 data points: net worth change since last month, savings rate for the month, total non-mortgage debt, one financial mistake or near mistake from the month, one decision being considered for next month, No advice is offered unless requested. The simple act of speaking the numbers aloud to people who will see them again next month is the entire mechanism. A small group of 3 or 4 people meeting once a month for 45 minutes often outperforms every paid financial planning service the same households would otherwise consider. The structure is older than financial apps by several centuries. Number 8. Cash-first spending for high-velocity categories. Japan remains a cash-heavy economy in 2026, despite years of digital payment adoption. A typical Tokyo household still uses physical yen for groceries, dining, transportation, and entertainment. Credit cards exist, but they are reserved for specific large categories rather than daily life. The behavioral consequence is significant. The MIT Sloan School of Management research on payment psychology, replicated multiple times since the early 2000s, shows that physical cash spending produces measurably less expenditure than card spending on the same categories. The friction of counting bills, watching the wallet thin, and physically handing money to a cashier slows down the transaction. Each purchase feels like an actual loss because it is one, tap to pay and one-click checkout were specifically engineered by payment companies to remove this friction. The friction was the mechanism that protected the consumer. Apply this to the highest velocity spending categories in 2026. American life, restaurants, coffee, bars, convenience stores, quick groceries. Withdraw a fixed amount of cash each Sunday for these categories. When the cash is gone, the category is closed for the week. The system needs to be specific. $200 and $20 bills, loaded into an envelope every Sunday morning, allocated mentally across the week. When the envelope is empty on Thursday, restaurants close until Sunday. The week does not end in disaster. It ends in a slightly leaner Friday and Saturday, and the household notices that life continued perfectly well. According to Empower's most recent reports, the average American household spends $179 per month on food delivery alone, up over 10% year over year. Streaming and rideshare have grown at similar rates. These are exactly the categories where cash friction would cut spending the fastest. The household using cash for restaurants and coffee typically reduces those categories by 30 to 40% within 60 days without consciously deciding to spend less. The wallet decides for them. The relief of not having to make the willpower decision in the moment is itself a benefit, separate from the financial savings. If this video is helping you, the algorithm rewards small signals. Now back to the habits, because the next 4 are where this whole system locks together. Number 9, wabi-sabi, the imperfect budget that survives. Wabi-sabi is the Japanese aesthetic philosophy that finds beauty in imperfection, transience, and the worn surfaces of long-used objects. A cracked tea bowl repaired with gold lacquer in the kintsugi tradition is considered more beautiful than the original. The flaws are honored, not hidden. The philosophy extends far beyond ceramics. It shapes how Japanese households think about success, failure, and the long passage of time. This concept solves the single biggest reason American budgets fail: perfectionism. A household sets a strict monthly budget on January 1st. The first 3 weeks go well. On day 22, an unplanned expense breaks the plan. The natural response is to abandon the entire system and start over next month. By March, the cycle repeats. By June, budgeting feels like a recurring failure, and the household stops trying. By October, the household has spent 9 months feeling defeated by a system that was perfectly capable of working at 80% capacity. The wabi-sabi approach treats imperfection as expected. A budget that hits 80% of its targets is functioning correctly. A month with one overspend in one category is not a failure. It is data. The plan adjusts the following month, the year continues, and the compounding savings still happen. Reframe what success means. Success is not a perfectly executed January. Success is a 15th consecutive year of imperfect budgeting that nonetheless produced a higher net worth than the household had at the start. The cracks in the system are part of the system. The repairs are part of the structure. Sustainability beats intensity every single time. The household that runs an imperfect budget for 10 consecutive years quietly outperforms the household that runs 3 perfect months and then quits. According to multiple personal finance studies, summarized by Charles Schwab in 2026, consistency of behavior is a stronger predictor of long-term net worth than intensity of effort. Quiet, imperfect, multi-decade budgeting wins. Number 10. Kaizen, the 1% annual savings escalation. Kaizen is the philosophy of continuous incremental improvement. Toyota built one of the largest manufacturing operations in human history on the principle that getting 1% better today, every day, beats waiting for a single transformative breakthrough that may never come. The same philosophy shapes how Japanese workers approach personal skill development, household management, and long-term financial planning. Apply Kaizen to the savings rate, not the budget itself. Most American households save somewhere between 3 and 6% of gross income annually, far below the 10 to 15% that financial advisors generally recommend. Jumping from 5% to 15% overnight is unsustainable for almost everyone. Lifestyle adjusts in the wrong direction, the household feels deprived, and the new rate collapses within 90 days. The Kaizen alternative looks almost laughable in its modesty. Increase the savings rate by 1 percentage point per year. That is it. Year 1, 6%. Year 2, 7%. 8%. Year 10, 15%. The household barely notices each annual change because the increase is small enough to hide inside the natural 1 to 3% annual raises that most workers receive. The lifestyle never feels reduced. The savings rate quietly triples across a decade. The implementation is mechanical. Set a recurring calendar reminder for January 1st of every year. On that date, log into the retirement account or automatic transfer settings and increase the contribution by exactly 1 percentage point. The change takes 90 seconds. The compound effect is enormous. The math is unforgiving. In the best possible way, a household earning $75,000 per year, escalating 1% annually, starting at age 30, retires with hundreds of thousands of dollars more than the same household stuck at a flat 6%. Same income, same spending, different protocol. This is the habit that quietly does the heaviest lifting. It almost never gets credit because it is too small to feel impressive in any single year. Number 11. Shoshin, the Beginner's Mind Subscription Audit. Shoshin is a Zen concept meaning beginner's mind. A practitioner approaches even familiar tasks as if seeing them for the first time. Free of assumptions, the application to personal finance is brutal. Once a year, ideally in the same month every year, sit down with the last 12 months of credit card and bank statements and audit every recurring charge as if you had never seen it before. Streaming services, software subscriptions, gym memberships, cloud storage, app subscriptions, insurance riders, donations on autopay, newsletter subscriptions, wholesale club memberships, magazine subscriptions inherited from a previous decade, free trials that quietly converted to paid memberships 18 months ago. According to Empower's 2025 spending data, the average American household carries somewhere around $273 per month in active subscriptions, much of it forgotten or barely used. That is over $3,200 a year, much of it draining accounts. On autopilot, the Shoshin question applied to each one is simple. If I were not already paying for this, would I sign up today at this price, knowing what I now know about my actual usage? If the answer is no, the subscription gets canceled immediately. No negotiation with yourself. No, I'll cancel next month. Particular categories deserve extra scrutiny. Streaming services with overlapping content libraries. Gym memberships that get used fewer than 4 times per month. Premium versions of free apps where the free version actually solves the problem. Cable bundles still attached to a landline that has not been used in a decade. Insurance riders sold during a previous life event that no longer applies. The first audit of a typical American household typically eliminates between $800 and $1,500 per year in subscriptions that produce no remembered value. That money invested across a working career easily exceeds $100,000 in retirement assets. The audit takes about 90 minutes once a year. The hourly return on that time is conservatively the highest in personal finance. Number 12, generational stewardship, the 50-year horizon. The final habit is the one that quietly reframes everything before it. Japanese culture takes generational thinking seriously in a way that has almost no equivalent in modern American life. Family businesses in Kyoto plan across centuries. The mukoyoshi practice, in which families adopt adult sons-in-law to continue the lineage of competent leadership, creates institutions that survive across hundreds of years. Over 80,000 such adoptions still take place annually in Japan, mostly involving men in their 20s and 30s. Wealth, in this framework, is not a personal score. It is a stewardship across time. Translate that into American financial behavior in 2026. Every major financial decision gets evaluated on a 50-year horizon, not a 5-year one. The house purchase is not, can I afford the payment this year? It is, will this asset still serve the next generation? Or will it be sold under pressure when I retire? The car purchase is not, can I get approved for the loan? It is, does this transportation decision align with the financial life I want at age 70? This single shift changes almost every line item in a household budget. The cheaper house quietly becomes the better house. The reliable used car becomes the obvious car. The retirement account becomes a generational vehicle, not a personal scoreboard. The estate plan, often delayed for decades by American households, gets handled in the first year of marriage, or the first year of significant income, because future generations are real people, not abstractions. The shift extends into the smallest decisions. A subscription is no longer evaluated only on this month's value. It is evaluated on the cumulative cost across 30 years if it remains active. A home renovation is not evaluated only on aesthetic improvement. It is evaluated on whether it preserves or destroys long-term resale value. A career decision is not evaluated only on next year's salary. It is evaluated on the trajectory it sets across the next 20 years. The Japanese family business that has operated for 400 years did not survive because of brilliant single-generation decisions. It survived because every generation refused to consume more than it produced, refused to risk the inheritance for short-term gains, and treated wealth as something held in trust. American households practicing generational stewardship in 2026 quietly join a tradition that is older than most modern nations. Now, 12 habits is a lot to absorb in one sitting, but the pattern beneath them is simple. And the pattern is the point. Every habit on this list works through the same underlying mechanism. Each one inserts structure between impulse and action. The kakeibo audit slows down the purchase. The hara hachibu rule removes spending capacity before lifestyle expands to fill it. Maten delays cravings. Hansei catches drift early. Shu hari prevents costly investing experiments. Tanamoshi creates social accountability. Cash first adds frictionless quitting. Kaizen makes savings rate increases invisible. Shoshin clears subscription clutter. Generational stewardship reframes the entire timeline. None of these habits require a higher income. None of them require a side hustle or a productivity system or a complicated app stack. They require a willingness to be slightly out of step with American spending culture for the next 10 to 20 years, and the patience to let compounding do its quiet work in the background. The Japanese household savings statistics tell only part of the story. The structural part of the story is the part that matters. Wealth that survives recessions, inflation cycles, tariff shocks, and decades of stagnant interest rates is built by these kinds of habits, not by clever timing. Look at what the data actually shows. The Bureau of Economic Analysis confirms the American personal savings rate is roughly half of its 60-year historical average. According to PYM-NTS intelligence research from January 2026, roughly 2/3 of American consumers continue to live paycheck to paycheck in early 2026. The Federal Reserve's 2024 SHED report documented that 37% of U.S. adults still cannot cover a $400 emergency. These are not statistics about poor people. They are statistics about a country where the structural habits required to build sustainable wealth have been gradually replaced by structural habits that consume it. The 12 Japanese habits in this video are the structural alternative. They are the version of financial life that gets practiced, not preached. The version that does not require a six-figure income, a market timing genius, or an inheritance to start working. The version that, applied across decades, quietly produces the kind of wealth that does not need to announce itself. Now, here is the part that matters most for actually applying any of this. These 12 habits assume something underneath them. They assume the household has not already walked into the predictable financial traps that quietly destroy the ability to use any of this wisdom in the first place. The retiree practicing generational stewardship at age 65 only gets to do so because the same person at age 25 and 35 and 45 did not fall into the specific debt traps, lifestyle traps, and timing traps that derail the average American across each decade. That is the foundation underneath the foundation. The Japanese habits compound only when the underlying financial life is structured correctly. Skip the traps in your 20s, the traps in your 30s, the traps in your 40s, and these habits become rocket fuel. Hit those traps, and even the best habits in this video cannot fully recover the lost decades. This is where most personal finance content quietly fails its audience. It teaches the habits without teaching the traps. It assumes a clean foundation that most American households simply do not have. The result is a household that adopts kakeibo and harahachibu and shoshin perfectly and still ends up underwater because of one specific trap that hit at age 28 or 35 and never got addressed. That is precisely the topic of the most important video on this channel, the breakdown of every financial trap at every age, from your 20s straight through retirement. Every age has a specific set of mistakes that quietly cost households 6 and 7 figures across a lifetime. The student loan trap in your 20s looks different from the lifestyle creep trap in your 30s, which looks different from the helicopter parenting trap in your 40s, which looks different from the early Social Security claim trap in your 60s. Knowing the traps at each decade is the prerequisite for everything you just heard. It is the foundation any real financial life is built on. And it pairs directly with the 12 habits in this video. The order matters. Avoid the traps first, then layer these habits on top, then watch quiet wealth build, year after boring year, in accounts nobody else sees. That is how it has worked in Japan for centuries. That is how it can work in America starting this month. For anyone willing to be patient enough to let it, you've just heard over 100 plus minimalist rules, frugal habits, and cultural money principles. From the foundational concept that everything you own costs money twice, to Japanese philosophies that most Americans will never encounter, to the specific daily behaviors that separate people who always have money from people who never do. If you absorbed even a fraction of what was in this video, you understand personal finance better than the vast majority of Americans. But understanding without action changes nothing. So here's what I want you to do. Pick 3 things from everything you just heard. Just 3. The ones that hit hardest. The ones where you thought, that's me, I need to change that. Start practicing those 3 things this week. Not next month, not when things settle down, this week. The people who build wealth don't try to implement 80 habits at once. They pick the 3 that matter most and let those compound until they become automatic. Then they add 3 more. That's the entire system. It's not complicated, it's just consistent. Every individual topic I covered today has its own dedicated video on this channel if you want to go deeper on anything specific. Subscribe if you want more of this. I break down one financial principle at a time every single week. I'll see you in the next one.